Marcus Wilson didn't believe in luck, not anymore. The hot Afghan sun had burned that out of him years ago, along with any notion that the universe followed a fair plan. So when his trembling fingers unfolded the letter that smelled of mildew and legal formality, he read it with a detached interest of a man who'd learned that life's surprises rarely tilted in his favor. The RV groaned in the night wind. Sophie slept in the converted dining area while Shadow, his German shepherd, with a slight limp from the same explosion that sent them both home, kept vigilant watch. The dog's ears remained perpetually alert even in rest. Some things you couldn't unlearn, not after Kandahar. The letter was addressed to him in formal type, Marcus Wilson's sole surviving heir to the estate of Benjamin Wilson. A property in Oregon, 46 acres including a cabin and a lake. Stillwater Hollow, the deed called it. No address, just coordinates in a county he couldn't place without a map. His uncle Benjamin, a ghost of a memory, his father's older brother, who disappeared into academic research decades ago. And now he'd inherited the man's isolation precisely when the eviction notice on his dashboard gave him 9 days to vacate the RV park. His hands shook more than usual tonight. The VA doctor had a name for it: neurological damage from heavy metal exposure during his third tour. What they didn't have was a solution, at least not one covered by his benefits. Sophie's small voice floated from the darkness. "What's that, Dad?" "Just some papers. Nothing important. Go back to sleep." But she was already climbing out of her nest of thrift store books. Her hair was wild from sleep, her cheeks flushed. And in the dim light, she looked so much like Rachel that Marcus had to turn away. Sophie slipped under his arm, peering at the envelope. "Is it about a house?" The question hung between them. They hadn't had a house since Rachel died. Cancer took her in stages, but it took their home in one clean sweep. The house went 6 months after the funeral. Not exactly. It's a cabin way up in Oregon, some woods a lake. Sophie's eyes widened. A real lake, her whispered awe made his chest ache. What kind of childhood was this, where a lake became mythical? She'd been drawing water scenes for months now, blue-green landscapes with depths she'd never actually seen. Something shifted in Marcus, then a decision forming before he consciously arrived at it. They had nowhere else to go. The drive took 2 days. The GPS surrendered as pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt. Marcus navigated by the coordinates he'd copied onto a gas station receipt. When they crested the ridge, the trees parted suddenly, revealing a wide clearing. Stillwater Hollow spread before them, unexpectedly vast. The lake stretched nearly half a mile across a perfect oval of water that didn't glitter under the autumn sun. Instead, it absorbed the light, a dark mirror framed by reeds and skeletal trees. Marcus cut the engine. The silence descended like physical weight. No bird song, no insect buzz, just the whisper of wind through brittle leaves. Is it supposed to look like that? Sophie pressed her palm against the window. Marcus had seen enough bodies of water to know this one was wrong somehow. Lakes reflected sky clouds surrounding trees. This one didn't. Its surface remained stubbornly opaque like liquid metal rather than water. The cabin stood about 50 yards back from the shore, its weathered frame listing slightly to one side. Windows clouded with decades of grime stared back at them, vacant and unwelcoming. Shadow growled low in his throat. Marcus laid a steadying hand on the dog's back, feeling the ripple of tension through muscle. Somehow the animal's unease validated his own instincts. Something wasn't right about this place. They approached the cabin cautiously. Marcus sent Shadow ahead to scout, watching as the shepherd moved with military precision around the perimeter. The dog disappeared briefly behind the structure, then reappeared with ears forward, but not alarmed. No immediate threats. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a single large room coated in dust. A table with mismatched chairs, a cast iron stove in one corner, shelves lined with mason jars, their contents long since turned to unidentifiable sludge. Marcus stepped inside, Sophie close behind him. The smell hit immediately, not the expected mustiness of abandonment, but something sharper, almost metallic. It reminded him of the antiseptic they'd used in field hospitals. A framed photograph hung on the wall, protected from dust by glass. A bearded man in a flannel shirt stood beside a canoe at the lake's edge. His expression was solemn, eyes fixed on something beyond the camera. Is that him? Sophie touched the frame with one finger. Uncle Benjamin. Marcus nodded, though he couldn't be certain. They had the same Wilson jaw, the same deep-set eyes. The electricity didn't work, unsurprisingly. The cabin had a hand-pumped well that miraculously still worked after several minutes of coaxing. Brown water sputtered out, then ran clear. Marcus wouldn't let Sophie drink it until he tested it, but it would serve for washing. Sunset came early to the hollow shadows stretching long across the clearing. Marcus unpacked essentials from the RV, sleeping bags, canned food, his toolbox. They'd sleep inside tonight, start repairs tomorrow. As he worked, Marcus kept finding his gaze drawn to the lake. Something about its unnatural stillness nagged at him. Lakes should have movement ripples from wind, concentric circles from fish feeding near the surface. This one remained perfectly smooth like black glass. They walked together toward the water's edge, shadow ranging ahead. The ground grew soggy underfoot as they approached reeds thickening around the perimeter. Marcus stopped Sophie about 10 feet from the shore, where the mud began to look treacherous. Sophie crouched down, extending one finger toward the water. Before Marcus could stop her, she touched the surface. A single ripple moved outward from the point of contact, perfect concentric circles that traveled a foot, then vanished completely. No echo back from the shore, no continued movement. Just gone. It feels sad, Sophie whispered, pulling her hand back, like it's waiting for something. The observation raised goosebumps on Marcus's arms. The lake did have a presence to it, an awareness that registered just below conscious thought. Shadow barked once sharp and sudden. He stood at rigid attention facing a thick stand of reeds on the far shore. Marcus followed the dog's gaze but saw nothing, just more stillness, more silence. The bedroom closet proved more challenging than expected. The door had swollen shut from moisture, requiring considerable force to open. When it finally gave way with a crack of splintered wood, Marcus found more than old clothes inside. Behind a stack of moth-eaten sweaters sat a small metal filing cabinet. Locked. He carried it to the table, examined the simple mechanism. Nothing his screwdriver couldn't handle. Inside, he found stacks of manila folders, their labels faded but legible. Site reports, contamination metrics, remediation protocols. Government letterhead adorned many of the pages, stamps marking them from agencies Marcus recognized: Department of the Interior, U.S. Geological Survey, EPA. One map caught his attention immediately. Topographical lines traced the hollow with the lake marked as Site 14B. Red circles indicated sampling locations around the perimeter with handwritten notes in the margins. Unstable lithium deposits. Microbial activity unprecedented. Containment questionable. A leather-bound notebook contained the most detailed information, written in a tight, angular script. Benjamin had documented years of observations cataloging changes in the water's chemical composition, the surrounding soil, even weather patterns. Many entries included references to bioactive agents and remediation potential. One passage stood out, dated nearly 15 years ago. The microbes continue to evolve, adapting to higher concentrations than previously thought possible. If my hypothesis proves correct, we've discovered the first naturally occurring biological system capable of neutralizing heavy metal contamination on an industrial scale. Later entries grew increasingly paranoid. Benjamin documented strange vehicles appearing near the property, unexplained equipment failures, missing samples. He'd filed complaints with various agencies, receiving either silence or dismissal. The final entry, dated just months before his death, contained a single line: "They want to extract, not preserve. They've never understood what we have here." The generator proved less damaged than it appeared. 2 hours of cleaning corrosion and replacing worn parts had it sputtering to life. By sunset, they had limited electricity enough for basic lighting and to run the ancient refrigerator Marcus had found in a storage shed. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Marcus returned to the documents. One letter in particular demanded attention: Official Department of the Interior letterhead addressed to Dr. Benjamin Wilson, referencing unauthorized disclosure of classified research and breach of security protocols. This tone was threatening, ordering his uncle to cease all independent research at Site 14B. The date matched the paranoid entries in the journal. Whatever Benjamin had discovered, someone wanted it kept quiet. The next morning, Marcus collected samples from the lake water, in mason jars, mud from the shore, even reeds growing at the water's edge. He needed to understand what made this place special enough to classify. The nearest town, Pinecrest, sat 30 miles south down winding forest roads. Population 1-200, according to the faded welcome sign. Marcus found what he needed on a side street. Pinecrest environmental testing, a small private lab that advertised soil and water analysis. The technician, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a lab coat that had seen better days, took his samples with professional detachment. He gave his practice story about evaluating the property for potential development, needing to check water quality before making decisions. At the grocery, he filled a cart with essentials, rice beans, canned goods, things that would last if they needed to hunker down. The cashier, gray-haired and curious, made small talk as she scanned his items. New in town, just passing through, checking out some property. The Wilson place up at the Hollow. Marcus paused, surprised to be identified so easily. The cashier continued. People used to say that lake was special, had healing properties way back when. Native folks thought it was sacred ground. Then the government men came in the 70s, put up signs, took samples. After they left, nothing was the same. Fish disappeared. Birds stopped coming. Ben was the only one who stayed. On the drive back, Marcus mulled over her warning. Small towns bred superstition, especially around natural features that behaved unusually. But combined with Benjamin's research, the government involvement, he couldn't dismiss it entirely. That night, the dreams came. Marcus rarely remembered dreams of small mercy given what his subconscious had to work with. But these images stayed with him upon waking the lake, glowing faintly from within patterns of light, shifting beneath the surface. In the dream, he waded in up to his knees and the tremors in his hands stilled completely. He woke to find Sophie standing by his bed, shadow at her side. Her eyes were wide, serious in the pre-dawn light. The lake is different today. He followed her outside the morning air, sharp with approaching winter. Mist clung to the water as usual, but something had changed. The surface rippled slightly, though no wind disturbed the trees around them. As they watched, the ripples organized into concentric circles emanating from the center, as if something large had dropped into the deepest part. The circles expanded, reached the shore, then reflected back normal lake behavior that had been notably absent until now. By late afternoon, Marcus had established a routine that almost felt like normal life. The cabin was taking shape around them, becoming, if not comfortable, then at least functional. The propane stove worked, the roof no longer leaked, and with the generator running a few hours each day, they could have hot water and light. The water had returned to stillness, but not the absolute unnatural calm of before. Tiny ripples disturbed the surface near the reeds, suggesting small aquatic life that hadn't been evident earlier. Sophie crouched at the edge, careful not to touch this time. "It's waking up," she said with absolute certainty. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Shadow barked a sharp warning rather than alarm. The dog stood rigid, facing the trees on the far side of the clearing. Marcus scanned the tree line, hand automatically reaching for a sidearm that was no longer there. Years of combat had honed his senses. Someone was watching them. He caught it, then a flash of movement between pines, the unmistakable shape of a person withdrawing deeper into cover. Not a hiker or hunter moving openly, but someone deliberately concealing their presence. Sophie back to the cabin. Now. The sound of an approaching vehicle reached them just after sunset. Headlights swept across the cabin windows as a car pulled into the clearing. Marcus positioned Sophie in the bedroom with Shadow the shotgun within reach, but not in hand. No need to escalate immediately. 3 sharp knocks on the door, precise and confident. Not a neighbor's hesitant greeting. Marcus opened the door just enough to see the visitor, a man in his 50s, wearing a charcoal suit beneath a heavy overcoat. His shoes were polished leather, absurdly formal for the muddy clearing. Behind him idled a black SUV with government plates. The stranger smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Mr. Wilson, Marcus Wilson." His voice carried the practiced ease of someone accustomed to authority expecting compliance. "That's right, David Cross Meridian Corporation. I apologize for the late hour, but we've only just learned about your inheritance. I'd like to discuss a business opportunity regarding this property." Marcus didn't invite him in, instead stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind him. Shadow slipped through before it closed, positioning himself between the men, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Cross glanced at the dog, recognition flickering across his features. "Beautiful animal, former service, I assume, like yourself." The casual reference to Marcus's military background sent a warning signal up his spine. This wasn't information a random corporate representative should have at hand. "What do you want?" Cross reached into his coat, movements deliberately slow as he extracted a slim folder. Meridian specializes in resource development and environmental remediation. We've had our eye on this region for some time. We're prepared to offer you $500,000 for the property as is. No inspections, no contingencies, immediate closing. You could be in a new home by Thanksgiving. The amount struck Marcus like a physical blow. $500,000, enough to buy a decent house outright, set up college funds for Sophie, never worry about basic necessities again, which was precisely why alarm bells rang in his mind. No one offers that kind of money sight unseen unless the property holds value far beyond the asking price. What's Meridian's interest in the Hollow Cross's smile tightened fractionally? The area has potential for certain specialized applications. Nothing that would interest a layperson. The important thing is that the offer allows you to relocate your daughter to more appropriate accommodations immediately. I understand your current situation is challenging. Again, the casual reference to personal details Marcus hadn't shared. Shadow's growl deepened, sensing his handler's tension. I need time to consider it. Cross shook his head slightly, regretful. I'm afraid the offer expires tonight. Corporate policy on acquisitions of this nature. Marcus didn't reach for the pen. Cross extended. The answer's no. Not tonight anyway. Something cold flashed behind Cross's professional demeanor. I strongly suggest you reconsider, Mr. Wilson. Opportunities like this don't come twice, especially for men in your position. The implied threat hung in the night air between them. Shadow's hackles raised a ridge of fur standing along his spine. I appreciate your time, Mr. Cross. Good night. Marcus remained on the porch until the SUV's taillights disappeared down the access road. Only then did he release the breath he'd been holding, the familiar combat tension draining slowly from his muscles. Inside, Sophie waited at the bedroom door, small face solemn in the lamplight. Are we leaving? Marcus crouched to her level, meeting her eyes directly. Not tonight, not until we understand what we have here. After Sophie fell asleep, Marcus returned to Benjamin's files, reading more carefully now. Certain passages stood out with new significance. Lithium concentrations exceed all documented natural deposits. Initial estimates suggest commercial viability, but extraction would destabilize the microbial ecosystem irreparably. Lithium essential for batteries, electronics, a resource increasingly valuable as technology advanced. If the lake contained major deposits, it explained Meridian's interest. Another entry detailed the unique properties of the lake's microbial life. These organisms appear to metabolize heavy metals, converting toxic compounds into benign forms. Early trials suggest applications for environmental disaster sites, mining runoff, even nuclear waste storage. The pieces aligned with disturbing clarity. Benjamin hadn't been a paranoid recluse. He'd been a whistleblower trying to protect something remarkable from exploitation. The government had classified his research, then buried it when he refused to cooperate. A noise outside pulled Marcus from his reading, a branch snapping too heavy to be wildlife. Shadow was instantly alert, a low growl building in his chest. Marcus extinguished the lamp, moved to the window. Moonlight illuminated the clearing enough to make out shapes. Nothing moved near the cabin, but at the lake's edge, shadows shifted against the tree line. He counted 3 figures moving with the deliberate stealth of professionals. Not military, their movements lacked the disciplined coordination, but experience nonetheless. They carried equipment, setting up what appeared to be sampling apparatus near the shore. Trespassers, corporate scouts most likely gathering data to support Meridian's interest. Marcus woke before dawn, Shadow's vigilant presence beside the bed a reminder of the night's disturbance. The dog had alternated between window and door all night, tracking the intruder's movements, until they'd finally withdrawn around 3 a.m. Marcus slipped outside while Sophie still slept, making his way to where the trespassers had worked. Their footprints remained clear in the soft earth near the shore, 3 men, heavy equipment. They'd taken soil and water samples from multiple locations following a grid pattern that suggested scientific methodology rather than random exploration. One item they'd left behind, whether by accident or design, Marcus couldn't determine. A small core sample tube sealed and labeled with alphanumeric code SW14BL7. The glass was cool in his palm, the dark material inside more soil than water. The lab results arrived sooner than expected. The technician called him directly, her voice tense with professional excitement. Mr. Wilson, I've completed preliminary analysis of your samples. You need to come in, today if possible. Dr. Eliza Chen ushered him into a back office without preamble. She looked like she hadn't slept, dark circles under eyes bright with intellectual fervor. Your water sample is the most remarkable thing I've seen in 15 years of environmental analysis. There's a microbial presence unlike anything in the literature. These organisms are actively metabolizing heavy metals, converting them to non-toxic compounds. She spread printouts across her desk, chemical analyses, microscope imagery, comparison charts. The lithium concentration alone would make this site commercially significant, but the biological activity is the real discovery. These microbes could revolutionize environmental remediation. Toxic waste sites mining runoff oil spills, the applications are endless. Marcus absorbed this, connecting it with Benjamin's notes. His uncle had discovered exactly what she described years earlier. Is it valuable? Chen laughed, a short, sharp sound. Valuable doesn't begin to cover it. We're talking billions in potential applications. Every resource extraction company on the planet would kill for proprietary access to these organisms. Have you shared this with anyone? She hesitated, professional enthusiasm dimming slightly. No, client confidentiality. But Mr. Wilson, you should know, findings like this attract attention, serious attention, from entities with resources and motivation to acquire exclusive rights. On the drive back, rain intensified to a downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against sheets of water. Marcus slowed to a crawl, mind racing faster than the vehicle ever could. Benjamin had discovered something world-changing, something powerful, interest wanted, controlled. He died protecting it, leaving the responsibility to a nephew he'd never met. Now Marcus had to decide, take Meridian's money and walk away, or stand his ground and face whatever came next. The decision crystallized as he turned onto the final approach road. Through the rain-blurred windshield, he caught a flash of light where no light should be, headlamps, multiple sets near the cabin. His foot pressed the accelerator, caution abandoned. The RV fishtailed on the muddy track engine, protesting as he pushed it beyond design limits. Sophie was up there with only shadow for protection. He rounded the final bend to find the clearing, transformed into a staging area. Two black SUVs identical to Cross's vehicle from the previous night, a larger truck with equipment visible beneath hastily secured tarps. Half a dozen men in rain gear moving with purpose between vehicles. No sign of Sophie or shadow outside the cabin. The door remained closed, lights off inside. Good. She'd followed his instructions to stay hidden if strangers appeared. Marcus killed the headlights before entering the clearing, allowing the drumming rain to mask his approach. He parked behind a stand of pines, obscured from immediate view, and retrieved the shotgun from beneath the seat. The men hadn't noticed him yet, focused on unloading equipment from the truck. Marcus recognized drilling apparatus, sample collection gear, and what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar. Not a casual survey, this was a full exploratory operation. He circled through the trees using skills honed through 3 combat tours to move undetected despite the difficult conditions. The rain provided cover, drowning out small sounds and reducing visibility. He reached the rear of the cabin unseen, slipping through the back door he'd repaired days earlier. Inside, darkness and silence greeted him. Marcus moved through the kitchen area, shotgun ready, but not raised. Training kept his finger outside the trigger guard, identified targets before engaging always. A soft whine from the bedroom drew him forward. He found Sophie and Shadow huddled in the closet, the dog positioned protectively before the child. Relief flooded his system, followed immediately by renewed focus. They were safe for now. He needed to keep them that way. Sophie's eyes widened at the sight of the weapon, but she asked no questions. She'd grown up military, understood that sometimes safety required force. Stay here, no matter what you hear, don't come out until I call for you. She nodded, small hand buried in Shadow's fur. The dog looked to Marcus, awaiting instructions. Guard. The single command was all Shadow needed. He settled more firmly in front of Sophie, eyes locked on the closet entrance. He would allow no one past, not without Marcus's explicit order. Marcus returned to the main room, positioning himself where he could observe the clearing through a gap in the curtains. The men had completed unloading now, concentrating their equipment near the lake's northeastern quadrant, exactly where Benjamin's maps had indicated the highest concentration of whatever made this place valuable. One figure stood apart from the others, directing operations from beneath an umbrella. Even through the rain, Marcus recognized David Cross's rigid posture and authoritative gestures. They were moving fast with the confidence of men who expected no interference. No permits visible, no official oversight, just corporate interests taking what they wanted as they had countless times before. The decision came down to a simple truth. Some lines once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. If Meridian extracted samples today, the lake's secret would belong to them, regardless of property rights or legal ownership. Marcus checked the shotgun loaded with buckshot, not lethal at distance, but persuasive enough to make his point. He pulled on his rain jacket, secured the cabin door behind him, and stepped into the downpour. The rain enveloped him, cold fingers working through every seam in his clothing. He moved deliberately, not hiding his approach now, but making it measured, controlled. His combat experience had taught him that confidence often deterred violence more effectively than threats. He was halfway to the lake before one of the workers noticed him shouting an alert that brought operations to a halt. Cross turned umbrella tilting to reveal his face. No surprise registered in his expression, only cold calculation, as if Marcus were a variable he had already factored into his equations. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Marcus kept his voice even-pitched to carry through the rain without escalating to a shout. The shotgun remained pointed downward, present, but not threatening. Yet, Cross gestured and his men stepped back from their equipment, hands visible, but postures alert. They'd been briefed on the property owner, prepared for potential confrontation. "Mr. Wilson, I'd hoped we could handle this amicably. My offer from yesterday still stands $500,000 immediate transfer. You and your daughter could be in a hotel tonight, somewhere warm and safe." The subtle emphasis on safe wasn't lost on Marcus. Neither was the fact that Cross knew Sophie was here despite her remaining hidden inside. The answer's still no. "Pack up your equipment and leave." Cross sighed, the sound almost lost in the drumming rain. "I don't think you understand what you're involving yourself in. This property contains resources of national significance. Meridian has extraction rights granted at the highest levels. Your uncle's deed, notwithstanding certain mineral rights, supersedes surface ownership." Marcus recognized the lie. If Meridian had legal rights, they wouldn't need his signature, wouldn't offer to buy the property outright. "Then show me the paperwork. Official permits, government authorization. Otherwise, you're just trespassing, and I'm within my rights to defend my property." He shifted his stance slightly, allowing the shotgun to rise an inch. Not aiming, but the message clear enough. Cross's expression hardened, the corporate veneer slipping to reveal something colder beneath. "You're making a serious mistake, Wilson. Men like you don't win against companies like Meridian. We have resources you can't imagine, connections at every level of government. Your military record, your financial situation, your daughter's welfare, all of it can be influenced by the right pressure in the right places." The threat landed exactly as intended, ice spreading through Marcus's veins. Not fear for himself, but for Sophie. Veterans with PTSD lost custody battles every day, especially when financial stability came into question. Still, he held his ground. Some principles couldn't be compromised, not without surrendering everything that mattered. "You have 10 minutes to clear out. After that, I call the sheriff." An empty threat, the local authorities would likely side with the powerful corporation over the newcomer veteran. But Cross wouldn't know that Marcus understood this reality. For a moment, tension crackled between them, amplified by the storm's electric atmosphere. The workers glanced between their boss and the armed property owner, calculating their own risks and responsibilities. Then Cross nodded once sharply. "Pack it up. We're done for today." The men moved quickly, securing equipment against the rain. They'd come prepared for a hasty departure, if necessary, another sign this operation wasn't as official as Cross claimed. Within minutes, the vehicles were loaded. Cross remained last standing at the lake's edge while his men prepared to leave. He turned to Marcus, rain streaming down his face like tears his eyes were incapable of producing. "This isn't over, Wilson. Not by a long shot. That lake contains something too valuable to leave in the hands of a broken veteran playing homesteader. You'll hear from us again." He delivered this with absolute certainty, then turned and walked to the lead SUV without looking back. Marcus maintained his position until the vehicles disappeared down the access road, rain erasing their tracks almost immediately. Only then did he lower the shotgun, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical blow. His hands trembled, worse than usual, fingers stiff from cold and tension. Inside the cabin, Sophie emerged from the bedroom at his call, Shadow still glued to her side. Her small face registered relief, then immediate concern as she took in his drenched state. Marcus shed his soaked jacket, set the shotgun safely aside, and crouched to her level. I think it's time we learned exactly what makes this lake so special. What do you say we do some investigating of our own? Her smile bloomed slowly, the adventure framing their situation in terms she could embrace rather than fear. That was the thing about Sophie, she'd always been able to find the wonder where others saw only worry. As night fell, the storm intensified. Wind howled through the trees surrounding the hollow branches, scraping against the cabin roof like skeletal fingers seeking entrance. Rain pounded the windows in rhythmic sheets, occasionally illuminated by distant lightning. Through the rain, headlights suddenly illuminated the scene, another vehicle arriving, this one larger than the others. It pulled directly into the work area, high beams cutting through the downpour. The driver's door opened, and David Cross emerged completely unperturbed by the tableau before him. He wore the same immaculate suit as before, protected now by an expensive raincoat. His shoes still gleamed, somehow untouched by the mud surrounding them. "I told you this wasn't over, Wilson." His voice carried the absolute confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. He gestured toward the surrounding forest, a small, smug movement. "My security team is currently searching your cabin. Your daughter and that remarkable dog are being escorted to more comfortable accommodations. Unless you'd prefer to put down the shotgun and discuss terms like reasonable men." Ice flooded Marcus's veins. Sophie. He'd hidden her in the root cellar, but how thoroughly would they search? How long before they found the trapdoor? Cross smiled, reading the calculation in Marcus's expression. $500,000, Wilson. The offer expires in 30 seconds, along with any guarantee of your daughter's continued comfort. Marcus lowered the shotgun, fractionally mind racing. If he surrendered now, accepted the money, at least Sophie would be safe. They could start over somewhere else, somewhere without corporate predators circling. But Benjamin's research flickered through his thoughts, the lake's potential to clean contamination, to heal environmental damage. The same toxic metals that had poisoned Marcus's body during his service left him with tremors that medication couldn't touch. His uncle had died protecting this discovery. Could Marcus do any less? No deal, Cross. Not today, not ever. Lightning split the sky directly overhead, illuminating the clearing in stark white brilliance. In that frozen moment, Marcus saw something that changed on everything, shadow emerging from the trees behind Cross, moving with the deadly silence of a combat-trained predator. Sophie wasn't in danger. She'd followed instructions, remained hidden. And somehow Shadow had slipped away, tracking Marcus through the storm, arriving precisely when needed. The lightning faded, plunging them back into rain-soaked darkness. Cross hadn't noticed the dog, his attention fixed on Marcus's defiance. "I warned you about making enemies of men like me. Your military record shows signs of PTSD, possible neurological damage. How quickly do you think child services would remove your daughter if they received reports of erratic behavior, armed confrontations, paranoid accusations against respected corporations?" He stepped closer. "Confidence absolute. You're one signature away from security, Wilson. One signature away from giving your daughter the life she deserves. Or you can cling to this worthless piece of land and lose everything." Marcus met his gaze steadily, seeing not a corporate executive, but every power-drunk officer who'd sent good soldiers to die for questionable objectives, every bureaucrat who'd denied veterans the care they had earned with blood. The land isn't worthless. You and I both know that. Whatever's in this lake is valuable enough to make you break laws to get it. Which makes me wonder, what else is it capable of? He shifted stance slightly, a minimal movement that nevertheless drew all eyes to him rather than the approaching shadow behind Cross. "My uncle didn't die protecting a lithium deposit. He died protecting something revolutionary. Something that could change how we clean up the messes companies like yours leave behind." Cross's expression hardened, the mask of reasonable negotiation slipping. "Your uncle was a delusional old man who thought bacterial sludge was more important than progress. He interfered with legitimate research, stole government property, and died alone because he couldn't recognize opportunity when it presented itself." Shadow was mere feet away now, a darker shape within the storm's darkness. Marcus needed just a few more seconds of distraction. Opportunity for whom? The corporations that could patent naturally occurring organisms, the military that could weaponize environmental cleanup, Everyone except the people who actually need healing. Cross's laugh was genuine if cold. Don't tell me you've become an environmentalist, Wilson. 3 tours in the Middle East, burning through fuel and ammunition, and now you're concerned about Mother Nature. This isn't about principles, it's about price. Name yours. Marcus allowed himself a small smile, not of amusement, but recognition. He'd seen Cross's type before, men who believed everything and everyone had a price, who couldn't conceive of values that transcended transaction. Some things aren't for sale, Cross. This lake, whatever makes it special, it stays protected. My uncle gave his life for that principle. I'm prepared, Bubby. I'm prepared to fight for it too. As he spoke the final words, Marcus gave a slight nod. Shadow launched forward, a blur of muscle and trained aggression. The dog hit Cross from behind, driving him face first into the mud. Not attacking to maim, but controlling, pinning as he'd been trained to do with hostile targets. The security team was running back toward the commotion, but too late. Marcus raised the shotgun, not at Cross, but at the drilling equipment. Clear out, now, or I destroy whatever you came for. The tableau held for 3 heartbeats, the corporate executive pinned by a war dog, the wounded veteran holding destruction in his hands, the storm raging around them like nature's own fury. Then Cross gave a sharp command, his authority undiminished despite his undignified position. Stand down, we're leaving. Shadow maintained his hold until Marcus gave the release command. The dog backed away, still growling, positioning himself beside his handler. Cross rose slowly, dignity shattered along with his immaculate appearance. Mud covered his expensive suit, rain plastering his carefully styled hair to his skull. For the first time, he looked human rather than corporate. This isn't the end, Wilson. Men like me don't lose. Marcus held his gaze steadily. Men like you always lose eventually. You just usually destroy too much before you do. The extraction team packed up with military efficiency, abandoning some equipment in their haste. Within minutes, headlights cut through the rain as the convoy withdrew, leaving churned mud and generator fumes as the only evidence of their presence. Marcus maintained his position until the last sound of engines faded. Only then did he lower the shotgun, the adrenaline crash hitting him like physical impact. His hands shook violently, combat aftermath combining with his permanent tremor. Shadow pressed against his leg, offering the steady warmth that had sustained him through countless dark nights. Together they returned to the cabin, found Sophie still hidden in the root cellar, precisely where he'd told her to stay. Her small face registered relief, then determination, as she emerged from hiding. She didn't ask questions about the shouting, the confrontation. She simply took his trembling hand in her steady one and led him to the fire he'd built earlier. We're staying, aren't we? The question contained no fear, only certainty. She'd already decided their course. Marcus nodded, the weight of commitment settling over him like a familiar rucksack. They'd stand their ground, protect what Benjamin had died defending. Not just for principle, but for possibility, the lake's potential to heal, to restore, to make broken things whole again. Outside, the storm began to ease, rain softening from violent sheets to gentle percussion. Through a gap in the curtains, Marcus caught a glimpse of the lake. Its surface no longer appeared dead and metallic. Ripples moved across it, concentric circles, expanding from the center, like a heartbeat resuming after long dormancy. Whatever slept beneath those dark waters was awakening, and Marcus, Wilson broken, soldier that he was, would ensure it had the chance to fulfill its purpose. Dawn broke over Stillwater Hollow with reluctant gray light. Marcus Wilson stood on the porch, coffee mug, cooling in his trembling hands. The previous night's confrontation with Cross and his Meridian team had left a residual tension that sleep couldn't dispel. In the military, they'd called it contact vigilance, the hyper-awareness following engagement with the enemy when every sense remains primed for the next attack. Because there would be a next attack. Men like Cross didn't retreat. They regrouped. Shadow circled the clearing, moving in methodical patterns that mirrored his handler's strategic assessment. The German shepherd's behavior had shifted subtly overnight, his movements becoming more deliberate, military precision replacing domestic pet behavior. His ears pivoted constantly, tracking sounds beyond human perception, nose sampling air currents for unfamiliar scents. The vigilance they'd both developed in Afghanistan served them well now. Inside the cabin, Sophie slept beneath a pile of blankets, exhaustion having finally claimed her after the midnight standoff. She'd asked no questions about the confrontation, demonstrating a soldier's child adaptability that pained and impressed Marcus equally. At 8 years old, she'd already seen too much of the world's harder edges. The lake had changed again overnight. Its surface now rippled continuously in concentric patterns, expanding from center to shore, as if the water itself was breathing. More remarkably, the metallic opacity had given way to increasing transparency near the edges, revealing submerged features previously hidden from view. Through newly clear water, Marcus could discern small plant shoots emerging from the lake bed, reaching upward toward sunlight. Benjamin's research journals explain the phenomenon: microbial colonies responding to environmental threat through accelerated activity. His uncle had documented how the lake's unique ecosystem activated defensive mechanisms when disturbed, not unlike an immune response in living organisms. Meridian sampling had inadvertently triggered what Benjamin called an adaptive acceleration, awakening processes dormant for decades. The cabin door opened behind him. Sophie emerged wrapped in a blanket, shadow immediately shifting position to accommodate her presence. "Look, Dad, the fish are back." She pointed toward ripples breaking the surface near the eastern shore. Not the purposeful movements from the lake's center, but the familiar feeding patterns of small fish. Life returning to waters that had been effectively dead since government testing decades earlier. Marcus placed his hand on her shoulder, steadying himself as much as reassuring her. Dr. Chen's analysis had confirmed the lake's extraordinary properties. Microorganisms capable of consuming toxic metals, neutralizing contamination that killed conventional aquatic life. But the speed of recovery exceeded anything documented in Benjamin's journals or scientific literature. The lake wasn't just healing, it was transforming at unprecedented rates. "I've never seen anything like this, Sophie. The rehabilitation potential alone could revolutionize environmental cleanup worldwide." Before he could elaborate further, the satellite phone rang. The secure line Rita Halverson had provided yesterday connected to her network of environmental activists and Meridian resistance. He answered with military brevity, listen mode rather than conversation. The female voice spoke with practiced urgency. "Meridian filed for emergency inspection orders this morning. Environmental hazard claims potential watershed contamination. County officials approved without hearing. They'll arrive with state environmental personnel within hours. Standard tactic: legal access for further intelligence gathering, documentation for forced acquisition. Rita's sending Maya Ramirez your way. Be prepared for government officials by noon." Marcus acknowledged and disconnected, immediately shifting to defense preparation. They needed to secure Benjamin's research, establish perimeter awareness, and prepare legal countermeasures before Meridian's next incursion. The tactic aligned with corporate appropriation playbooks, bureaucratic warfare following failed direct acquisition. Sophie sensed the shift in atmosphere. She stood straighter, military child adaptability taking over. "What do we need to do?" The question contained no fear, just practical assessment. She'd inherited the Wilson resilience that had carried them through Rachel's illness, through homelessness, through every setback since. Marcus outlined their priorities with the directness he'd used with a subordinate in combat planning. First, secure all documentation in weatherproof containers. Then retrieve anything from the RV we can't afford to lose. Establish observation posts covering the access road and lakeside approach. Photograph current lake conditions for evidence. As they worked, Marcus explained the situation in terms Sophie could understand without minimizing reality. Meridian wanted the lake's special properties, both the lithium beneath and the microbes within. They would use legal mechanisms to force access, gathering evidence to support claims of environmental hazard or owner negligence. Government officials would provide legitimacy cover for corporate objectives. Sophie absorbed the information without panic, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her grasp of their precarious position. By mid-morning, they had established basic security documentation secured in waterproof containers, hidden beneath loose floorboards, observation points marked for maximum visibility, photographic evidence of the lake's accelerating transformation recorded on Benjamin's old digital camera. Marcus checked his watch. Maya Ramirez should arrive within hours. The environmental attorney Rita recommended had fought Meridian before understood their tactics, knew the relevant legal frameworks. Until then, they would maintain vigilance and gather evidence of the lake's remarkable recovery. As Sophie photographed newly emerging fish near the shore, a flash of movement caught Marcus's attention, something larger than the minnows currently populating the shallows. He approached, carefully, shadow at his side, squinting against morning glare, reflecting off the increasingly clear water. A salamander-like creature moved through emerging aquatic plants, translucent skin, revealing blue-tinged organs pulsing beneath specialized appendages unlike conventional amphibians. Marcus recognized it immediately from Benjamin's research journals. Ambystoma stillwater, the species believed extinct since the 1970s. Government testing adapted specifically to the hollow's unique chemical conditions. Sophie spotted it simultaneously, her gasp carrying equal parts wonder and vindication. She'd drawn these creatures in her sketchbook days earlier, before any had been observed, somehow intuiting their existence before physical evidence appeared. The lake remembers what it was before they poisoned it. It's bringing everything back. The observation carried wisdom beyond her years. Recognition that ecosystems retain memory through dormant seeds, eggs, spores, microbial communities. Life finding ways to persist despite human intervention. Marcus documented the amphibian's reappearance with multiple photographs, evidence of ecological recovery that would prove invaluable against Meridian's contamination claims. A vehicle engine rumbled in the distance, not the aggressive roar of Meridian's SUVs, but the lighter approach of a civilian car negotiating rough terrain. Marcus signaled Sophie toward the cabin, Shadow automatically positioning himself between potential threat and the child. The vehicle that emerged from the tree line was a weathered Toyota Camry, dust-covered and bearing Portland license plates. It stopped well short of the cabin driver, remaining inside momentarily proper protocol when approaching potentially defensive rural property. When the door finally opened, a woman emerged, early 30s, professional attire somewhat rumpled from long travel, carrying a leather briefcase that suggested legal rather than corporate presence. Marcus approached cautiously, maintaining clear sight lines and defensive positioning. The woman made no sudden movements, instead producing identification and holding it visible. Maya Ramirez, environmental attorney, Rita Halverson sent me. The name matched their expected contact, but caution prevailed after yesterday's confrontation with Cross. Slide your credentials under the door when we get to the cabin. We'll verify before continuing. The woman smiled, slightly approval rather than offense at his security protocols. Good operational security. Rita mentioned you had military background. 3 tours Afghanistan, if I recall correctly. That experience will serve you well against Meridian's psychological tactics. Inside the cabin, Marcus examined her credentials thoroughly: Bar Association ID, environmental law certification, business card, matching Rita's contact information. The documentation appeared legitimate, allowing marginal relaxation of immediate security concerns. Maya surveyed the cabin's interior with professional assessment, noting their security preparations. Sophie's proximity to exits the documents spread across the table. She unpacked materials from her briefcase: legal precedents, property rights statutes, environmental protection frameworks, organizing them with practiced efficiency. Meridian filed for emergency inspection this morning, claiming potential environmental hazards originating from the property. She laid out county approval documents obtained through her contacts. Standard procedure when direct acquisition fails: establish legal presence, document conditions they can later misrepresent, identify vulnerabilities for future exploitation. The inspection team will include county officials, possibly state environmental services, and Meridian's private consultants disguised as regulatory support. Sophie watched from her position near the window, sketchbook clutched against her chest. The attorney addressed her directly without the condescension adults typically showed children during crisis discussions. You must be Sophie. Your drawings of the lake will be valuable evidence in court. Environmental protection often hinges on demonstrating aesthetic and spiritual value beyond scientific metrics. Your perspective captures what technical documentation cannot: the living quality of the ecosystem. The respectful acknowledgement visibly strengthened Sophie's resolve. She nodded once decision made. I'll draw everything that's happening today. Show how the lake is healing instead of dangerous. Maya smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional focus. Perfect. Child witness documentation carries special weight in environmental cases. Judges recognize the unique perception of young observers, unbiased by corporate frameworks. As morning advanced toward noon, they prepared methodically, establishing boundaries for inspection, personnel designating approved sampling locations, securing Benjamin's most sensitive research. Maya coached Marcus on specific language that would establish legal parameters without revealing strategic advantages. The property rights are absolute, including subsoil and water rights. The inspection order permits surface assessment only, no drilling, no excavation, no removal of materials beyond specifically documented samples. They cannot enter locked structures without explicit consent, cannot compel statements or signatures, cannot restrict your movement on your own property. Marcus absorbed her instructions with military precision, recognizing legal defense parallels to combat zone protocols, establish clear boundaries, maintain tactical advantage, document enemy violations, preserve strategic assets. The battleground differed, but principles remained consistent. A sound outside interrupted their preparations. Not engine noise, but footsteps approaching from the direction of the lake rather than the access road. Shadow alerted immediately, positioning himself between the door and Sophie, but without aggressive posture. The warning bark remained internal recognition of presence without perceived immediate threat. 3 soft knocks followed, deliberate but not demanding. Marcus motioned Maya and Sophie to positions of relative safety, then approached the door with necessary caution. Identify yourself, Isa Ramirez, Maya's sister. I came around the back way to avoid potential surveillance on the access road. Maya's expression confirmed the voice belonged to someone expected. We've been coordinating Meridian resistance efforts for years. Isa handles security and reconnaissance, while I manage legal frameworks. The woman who entered moved with unmistakable military precision. Economy of motion, continuous environmental assessment, strategic positioning within the space. She carried a small backpack containing what appeared to be electronic equipment rather than weapons, though her bearing suggested capability with both. Isa surveyed the cabin's defensive preparations with professional approval. You've established good initial security, better than most civilians would manage. Shadow relaxed incrementally at her entrance, suggesting the dog recognized military background similar to his handlers. Marine Corps 2 tours, Iraq, military police. Isa offered the information without prompting, establishing common ground through shared service experience. I've been tracking Meridian's movements since dawn. They're mobilizing significant resources, 3 SUVs, county, environmental services, vehicle, state, police escort. Expected arrival within the hour. She produced a small electronic device from her backpack, activating it and conducting methodical sweep of the cabin interior. Signal detector. No obvious surveillance devices yet, but Meridian routinely plants monitoring equipment during property assessments. From now on, sensitive discussions happen outside, away from potential electronic surveillance. The security assessment elevated their preparation from legal defense to comprehensive counterintelligence. Marcus recognized the shift, no longer just protecting property rights, but actively counteracting corporate espionage tactics. Meridian operated beyond conventional business practices, employing quasi-military intelligence gathering methods against private citizens. Isa examined the documentation spread across the table, particular attention focusing on Benjamin's journal containing cache locations. Your uncle created backup evidence repositories around the property, Marcus confirmed. 5 locations marked with coordinates. Haven't had time to check them all yet. We should retrieve those materials immediately. Isa's tone conveyed operational urgency rather than suggestion. The inspection order gives them property access. If they discover hidden caches, they'll claim authorization to seize materials as potential environmental hazards. Once in their possession, that evidence disappears permanently. The assessment accelerated their timeline. Marcus roused Sophie from her drawing position by the window, explaining the necessity for immediate action. The girl responded with soldier's child adaptability, securing her sketchbook and pulling on her jacket without question or complaint. They moved as coordinated unit, Marcus, Sophie, Shadow, and Isa, forming tactical formation that balanced security with efficiency. Benjamin's journal provided precise coordinates for 5 cache locations around the property perimeter, each containing different categories of evidence accumulated during his decades-long resistance against government and corporate exploitation. The first cache, hidden beneath a lightning-struck pine near the northeastern boundary, contained waterproof document tubes filled with government correspondence, official research authorization, followed by increasingly threatening demands when Benjamin refused to surrender his findings. Letters from the Department of Interior, Environmental Protection Agency, and classified military research divisions established clear pattern of government awareness regarding the lake's unique properties dating back to the 1970s. The second cache, concealed within small rock formation behind the cabin, held technical materials, laboratory analyses from independent testing. Benjamin had commissioned photographic documentation of the lake's properties across decades, comparative studies demonstrating the microbe's effectiveness against various toxic metals. Scientific evidence that would directly contradict Meridian's environmental hazard claims. As they approached the third location, Shadow suddenly froze ears forward, body rigid with alert tension. Marcus raised his hand, signaling immediate halt. The dog's behavior indicated human presence nearby, not immediate threat, but definite intrusion on their territory. Isa responded instantly, moving Sophie behind natural cover with practiced efficiency. The girl remained silent, understanding the need for absolute quiet without requiring explanation. Through trees ahead, flashlight beams swept methodically across underbrush, two light sources moving in search patterns, suggesting professional rather than casual exploration. Voices carried faintly through morning air, technical terminology, confirming Marcus's suspicion, advanced team deploying monitoring equipment before the official inspection. Advanced Team ISA confirmed in barely audible whisper, setting up baseline documentation they can manipulate during official inspection. Standard Meridian tactic established predetermined evidence points that support whatever narrative they prepared. Marcus calculated options with combat zone clarity. The third cache location lay directly in the intruder's path. Critical evidence would be discovered if they continued their current search pattern. Confrontation, now under their terms, presented strategic advantage over discovery during official inspection under Meridian's orchestrated conditions. He communicated his decision to Isa through military hand signals, establishing that she would remain with Sophie while he addressed the intrusion. She acknowledged with immediate understanding, former Marine recognizing tactical necessity without requiring verbal elaboration. Shadow followed as Marcus moved forward, the dog automatically adopting combat formation slightly ahead, in right position, optimized for both protection and attack if commanded. They approached using natural cover, maintaining silence while tracking the intruders through their own light sources and conversation. Two figures emerged into a small clearing, man and woman in civilian clothing, but with unmistakable consultant bearing. They carried environmental assessment equipment, soil sampling kits, water testing apparatus, drone case for aerial documentation. Precisely as Isa predicted, they were establishing baseline conditions before official inspection began. Marcus stepped from cover deliberately, shotgun visible but held non-threateningly at port arms position. Private property. You're trespassing. The intruders startled visibly, the woman nearly dropping her equipment. The man recovered more quickly, adopting authoritative posture despite his obvious surprise. We're environmental consultants with state certification. We have orders to conduct preliminary assessment in advance of tomorrow's official inspection. Marcus maintained steady pressure, voice calibrated for command presence without escalation. No one informed me of any inspection, preliminary or otherwise. I'll need to see those orders along with your identification and certification. The man hesitated, calculation evident in his expression. He hadn't expected direct confrontation, hadn't prepared adequate documentation to support their presence. His partner glanced toward the trees where their vehicle presumably waited, measuring escape options against potential confrontation. Shadow growled, then low warning rumble that carried ancestral threat. The sound triggered instinctive response, even in humans generations removed from predator-prey evolutionary dynamics. The woman stepped backward involuntarily. The county environmental office has concerns about potential contamination. We're just following procedure. Marcus maintained steady pressure. Show me the paperwork or leave immediately. Those are your only options. The bluff collapsed under direct challenge. The consultants exchanged glances, then began packing their equipment with poorly concealed frustration. The man attempted final assertion of authority. You're interfering with a legal environmental assessment. There will be consequences. Marcus allowed the threat to hang unanswered between them. He stood immobile, Shadow at his side, until the intruders retreated toward their vehicle. Only when engine sounds confirmed their departure did he rejoin Isa and Sophie among the trees. Isa's expression combined approval with strategic concern. Good work, but they'll report back immediately. Meridian will accelerate their timeline, possibly arrive within minutes rather than hours. We need to retrieve the remaining caches quickly. They continued with increased urgency, recovering the third cache from beneath a hollow log, soil samples showing microbial progression across decades, sealed with tamper-evident technology to maintain chain of custody evidence. The fourth cache, hidden beneath the cabin's porch floorboards, contained Benjamin's personal journal, detailing threats, bribes, and intimidation tactics employed against him. The final cache proved most valuable thumb drive sealed in epoxy and suspended within PVC pipe beneath the hollow's outflow stream, containing digital copies of all documentation, correspondence, and research spanning 20 years of resistance. By the time they returned to the cabin, Maya had organized legal countermeasures into tactical categories: property rights defense, environmental conservation arguments, evidence of corporate malfeasance. She examined the retrieved materials with growing strategic confidence. This documentation exceeds anything we've assembled against Meridian previously. Your uncle created comprehensive evidence, trail names, dates, specific threats, recorded conversations with government officials. With this, plus the lake's obvious ecological transformation, we have unprecedented leverage. Not just defensive position, but potential offensive capabilities. Criminal charges against the Meridian executives for environmental crimes, corruption, harassment. The assessment shifted their strategic position from resistance to potential victory. Marcus allowed momentary hope before tactical reality reasserted itself. If this evidence is so powerful, why didn't Benjamin go public? Force government action through media exposure. Issa and Maya exchanged glances laden with the shared knowledge. Issa answered, voice hardened by experience. He tried. 3 different journalists who received his documentation died in accidents within weeks. Congressional aide who's expressed interest found child pornography planted on his government computer, forensically proven false but career destroyed regardless. Benjamin eventually realized going public endangered others. He retreated, focused on protecting the property while building evidence for whoever came after him. The revelation settled across Marcus's shoulders like familiar combat rucksack, not just property inheritance, but mission continuation. His uncle had fought this battle alone for decades, maintaining strategic position against overwhelming opposition, preserving crucial evidence for future reinforcements. Now that continuity fell to Marcus, protecting not just land, but potentially revolutionary environmental restoration capability that powerful interests would destroy rather than share. Vehicle engines interrupted their planning, multiple vehicles approaching from the access road. Not advanced team returning, but the main inspection force arriving. Maya checked her watch with grim satisfaction. Meridian operates on intimidation timing, arriving earlier than scheduled to create psychological disadvantage. She gathered specific documentation organizing defensive legal positions. Sophie, secure your sketchbook somewhere safe but accessible. Your drawings of the lake's transformation will be important evidence. The convoy that emerged from the tree line confirmed Maya's assessment: 3 black SUVs leading, followed by county environmental services. Truck, state police cruiser, and final vehicle, they recognized as David Cross's personal transportation. 7 vehicles total, disgorging nearly 20 personnel into the clearing before the cabin. Overwhelming force, bureaucratic edition. Marcus stood on the porch, Maya and Issa flanking him, Sophie visible through the window behind them. Unified front deliberately positioned to project both legal preparation and family stakes. Shadow sat at Marcus's feet, alert, but not threatening his presence. Silent reminder of protection capabilities if required. Cross emerged from his vehicle last, allowing subordinates to establish perimeter positions before making his entrance. His expression registered brief surprise at their organized reception, quickly masked behind corporate confidence. He'd expected to find Marcus isolated, unprepared, vulnerable to intimidation. The presence of legal counsel, clearly professional, clearly prepared, constituted unexpected complication to his planned approach. Maya stepped forward, first credentials extended with professional authority. Maya Ramirez, representing the property owner. I'll need to examine your inspection order and verify all personnel before any access is granted. The attorney's confident intervention established immediate control over the interaction, forcing Cross to engage on legal rather than psychological territory. He produced documentation with poorly concealed irritation, his timeline already disrupted by procedural requirements he'd hoped to minimize. Maya reviewed the paperwork thoroughly, deliberately, taking time that visibly tested Cross's patience. The order appears limited to surface conditions, assessment, and standard environmental sampling. No excavation, no drilling, no removal of materials beyond specifically documented samples. Is that your understanding? Cross. The question forced him to either confirm the limitations or openly admit broader intentions. Cross chose the former, jaw tightening as he conceded the point. That's correct. Standard environmental assessment only. Our team simply needs to document current conditions to address potential contamination concerns. Maya nodded with professional courtesy that barely concealed strategic satisfaction. In that case, my client has prepared designated access routes through the property. Your team may proceed along those routes, only maintaining appropriate distance from the lakeshore to prevent disruption of the recovering ecosystem. All samples must be collected in our presence with duplicate specimens retained by us for independent verification. The restrictions, while legally reasonable, clearly frustrated Cross's actual objectives. His gaze shifted to Marcus, attempting to establish the psychological dominance that had nearly worked during their previous encounters. Mr. Wilson, surely you understand these precautions are unnecessary. My team includes certified environmental professionals who regularly conduct these assessments. Standard procedure allows them appropriate access to fulfill their responsibilities. Marcus met his gaze steadily, the night's preparations fortifying his resolve. Cross's attempt to bypass legal parameters through direct appeal failed against prepared resistance. I understand the inspection order's limitations perfectly. Mr. Cross, your team may proceed as Ms. Ramirez has outlined or not at all. Those are the only options available today. The statement delivered with military directness established non-negotiable boundaries. Cross recognized the shifted power dynamic, his expression hardening as he reassessed the situation. The man who stood before him was not the isolated, overwhelmed veteran he'd encountered previously. This Marcus Wilson had allies, legal support, and clear understanding of his rights, a far more formidable opponent than anticipated. Cross nodded curtly to his team, authorizing them to proceed under the established restrictions. The inspectors spread out along the designated routes, equipment deployed with professional efficiency despite their evident frustration at the limitations. Maya and Issa positioned themselves strategically, Maya accompanying the official county representatives to monitor their documentation. Issa tracking Meridian's private consultants to prevent unauthorized sampling. Marcus remained near the cabin with Sophie and Shadow maintaining vigilance over the overall operation while protecting their most vulnerable point. The inspection proceeded with surface compliance but underlying tension. Cross's team repeatedly tested boundaries approaching the lakeshore closer than permitted, attempting soil samples beyond approved depth, documenting areas outside the inspection order's jurisdiction. Each violation met immediate challenge from Maya or Issa, forcing retreat or compliance. By mid-morning, Cross's frustration had evolved to barely contained anger. The inspection yielded none of the unrestricted access he'd clearly anticipated, none of the intimidation valued he'd planned to leverage. Instead, his team operated under constant supervision, their activities documented as thoroughly as they documented the property. The confrontation point arrived when a Meridian consultant attempted to deploy water sampling equipment directly into the lake rather than collecting from the designated shore access point. Issa intercepted immediately, physically positioning herself between the equipment and the water. The inspection order specifies surface sampling from shore only. No direct lake access without specific authorization, which you don't have. The consultant glanced toward Cross, seeking direction. Cross approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to overriding opposition through sheer force of authority. The equipment requires direct water contact for accurate readings. Surely you understand the importance of scientific validity in environmental assessment. Maya joined the confrontation, documentation in hand. The order specifically limits water sampling to shore collection precisely because disruption could alter the ecosystem being evaluated. Your team may collect from designated points only using manual rather than mechanical methods. Cross abandoned pretense that corporate mass slipping to reveal the calculation beneath. Mr. Wilson, let's speak privately. There are aspects of this situation you may not fully appreciate. The attempt to separate Marcus from his legal support, to isolate him for direct pressure, might have worked days earlier. Now it registered as transparent manipulation, easily recognized and rejected. Anything you need to say can be said in front of my attorney, Mr. Cross. The refusal forced Cross to either retreat or escalate beyond the inspection's legal parameters. He chose escalation, a miscalculation that revealed his growing desperation. Your uncle stole government property, classified research, proprietary biological samples. Meridian has documentation proving Benjamin Wilson removed materials from secured facilities without authorization. That constitutes federal crime with potential implications for anyone knowingly harboring such materials. The threat delivered with practiced precision targeted Marcus's most vulnerable point, Sophie's security, the possibility of legal action that could separate father from daughter. Cross expected capitulation, expected fear to overcome resistance. Instead, Maya countered immediately, voice carrying clear authority. That's a remarkable claim, Sister Cross. I'd be very interested to see this alleged documentation, particularly since it would directly contradict the government's own correspondence with Dr. Wilson, which we have in our possession. She produced a file from her briefcase, opening it to reveal official letterhead. These communications clearly show Dr. Wilson was authorized to continue independent research after government funding ended. Any materials in his possession were legally his intellectual property, as confirmed by the Department of the Interior in this 2008 letter. She held up the document, one of those recovered from Benjamin's caches the previous night. Cross's expression flickered with genuine surprise, then recalculation. He hadn't anticipated documented counterclaims, hadn't prepared for evidence that directly contradicted Meridian's narrative. Before he could respond, the lake itself intervened. A sound drew all attention, not loud, but distinctive, a rhythmic pulsing that emanated from the water's surface. The lake, previously rippling gently in morning sunlight, now displayed concentric patterns expanding from its center, perfect circles advancing toward shore with unnatural precision. Where the waves touched land, the water clarity visibly increased, metallic opacity dissolving to reveal the lakebed beneath. Plants previously visible only as shadows now emerged in vibrant detail, aquatic vegetation recovering with accelerating speed, colors intensifying from muddy browns to vivid greens. More remarkable still, fish appeared, small silver forms darting between newly visible plants, movement where no aquatic life had existed for decades, according to Benjamin's documentation. Not introduction, but regenerations, species emerging from dormant eggs or microscopic remnants preserved somehow through years of apparent sterility. The transformation occurred with impossible speed, visible progression that defied normal ecological timelines. Everyone watched in silence as the lake essentially rewrote itself before their eyes, demonstrating capabilities beyond scientific explanation. Cross recovered first, voice tight with forced control. What have you done to accelerate the microbial activity? The question revealed more than he intended, explicit acknowledgement of the lake's special properties, of Meridian's awareness of the microbial ecosystem Benjamin had documented. No longer pretending routine environmental inspection, Cross had shifted to direct confrontation about the hollow's unique value. Marcus answered with simple truth. Nothing. The lake responds to disturbance. Your sampling triggered natural defense mechanisms. It's protecting itself. The statement echoed Benjamin's research: disturbance, triggering adaptive response, the ecosystem essentially immunizing itself against intrusion. Cross recognized the implication immediately, calculation visible in his expression as he reassessed both the situation and Marcus's understanding of it. Before he could respond, one of the Meridian consultants approached with urgent intensity, speaking low but audible in the clearing silence. Sir, readings indicate exponential increase in microbial activity. The samples are multiplying faster than our equipment can measure. If this continues, the entire lake will transform within hours, not the weeks we projected. The information clearly disrupted whatever timeline Cross had established, whatever extraction plans Meridian had developed. His expression shifted from controlled aggression to genuine concern, even alarm. Maya recognized the advantage immediately. Mr. Cross, it appears your inspection has triggered biological processes beyond your anticipation or control. I suggest you conclude your assessment and withdraw your personnel before you inadvertently cause precisely the environmental disruption your order claims to be investigating. The legal framing positioning Meridian as potential cause rather than objective assessor of environmental change created liability exposure Cross couldn't ignore. Corporate calculations visibly shifted in his expression, risk assessment overriding acquisition objectives. He signaled retreat with a sharp gesture to his team. Pack up. We've documented enough for preliminary reporting. The inspection team complied with military efficiency equipment secured and personnel loaded into vehicles within minutes. Cross remained last as before, unwilling to concede the final word. This changes nothing, Wilson. The lake's accelerated transformation only increases its value. Meridian will acquire this property through this avenue or another. The only variable is how much damage occurs before inevitable conclusion. Marcus held his ground, physical presence bolstered by legal and moral certainty. You're wrong about inevitability, Cross. My uncle fought you for years because he understood what you didn't. The lake isn't a resource to extract. It's a living system that defends itself. The more aggressively you pursue it, the more completely it will transform beyond your ability to control. Cross dismissed the assertion with corporate confidence, but uncertainty lingered in his expression as he departed. The convoy withdrew with less coordination than its arrival personnel, casting backward glances at the lake's continuing transformation, at the silverfish now clearly visible, breaking the surface in feeding patterns, at water clarity, increasing visibly with each passing minute. When the last vehicle disappeared down the access road, Maya turned to Marcus with professional assessment untainted by premature celebration. They'll return with different tactics, legal challenges to your inheritance, environmental violations, allegations, possibly criminal complaints, based on fabricated evidence. Standard Meridian approach when direct acquisition fails. ISA nodded agreement, already scanning the property for surveillance devices the inspection team might have left behind. They'll also escalate covert operations, electronic monitoring, physical surveillance, intelligence gathering. You'll need constant vigilance until we can secure court protection. The warnings registered not as discouragement, but as strategic information enemy capabilities, assessment, operational planning, requirements. Marcus's military experience translated civilian terminology into familiar tactical thinking, preparation, rather than fear. Sophie joined them on the porch, sketchbook clutched against her chest. She'd been drawing throughout the confrontation, documenting the lake's transformation with artistic precision that captured what scientific instruments measured, but couldn't fully express the living quality of the change, the purposeful nature of the ecosystem's response. She opened the book, displaying her latest drawing, the lake rendered in vibrant blues and greens, fish clearly visible beneath the surface, plants reaching upward from the lake bed. Along the shore, she'd drawn a human figure that resembled Benjamin, watching over the water with protective stance. The lake remembers him, she said with absolute certainty. It's finishing what he started. The observation carried wisdom beyond her years, intuitive understanding that adults often missed in their focus on measurable data. Marcus placed his hand on her shoulder, feeling the straight spine, the unwavering commitment she'd inherited from both sides of her family. Maya examined the drawing with professional assessment. This child's perspective documentation will be powerful evidence in court. Environmental protection cases often hinge on demonstrating ecosystems as living entities worthy of legal personhood. Sophie's drawings capture exactly that quality, the lake as sentient participant rather than passive resource. As Maya and Issa gathered their documentation to initiate formal legal protection proceedings, Marcus, Sophie, and Shadow remained at the lake's edge, watching the accelerating transformation. The water now displayed remarkable clarity, transparency, reaching 20 feet or more into previously opaque depths. Fish moved in growing numbers, aquatic plants visibly extending upward in accelerated growth cycles, the entire ecosystem rebuilding itself with impossible speed. Sophie crouched at the shoreline, fingers extended just above the water's surface. The lake wants to show us something. Before Marcus could respond, a ripple moved deliberately toward her hand. Not random wave action, but directed movement in water responding to her presence with apparent intention. When the ripple touched shore beneath her extended fingers, the water momentarily gathered upward, defying gravity to make contact with her skin. The connection lasted mere seconds, but Sophie's expression transformed with wonder and recognition. It's healing itself, and it wants to heal us too. The simple statement crystallized everything Benjamin's research had documented, everything Meridian sought to control, everything that made Stillwater Hollow worth protecting beyond resource valuation. The lake's microbial ecosystem didn't just clean environmental contamination, it actively restored damaged systems to natural balance, including potentially human systems. Marcus extended his own hand cautiously, tremors visible in the unsteady fingers. Another ripple moved purposefully toward him, water gathering to make contact just as it had with Sophie. The sensation registered as gentle warmth, subtle tingling that traveled from fingertips up his arm, spreading through his chest, finally reaching the damaged neural pathways that medicine had failed to repair. The tremors didn't disappear completely, but diminished noticeably steady enough to hold a cup without spilling, to write without struggle, to perform basic tasks that had grown increasingly difficult since his exposure to heavy metals during combat operations. Not miracle healing, but measurable improvement, physical validation of the lake's regenerative capabilities. Dr. Chen's preliminary analysis had indicated potential medical applications, but experiencing direct neurological improvement transformed theoretical possibility into undeniable reality. Shadow approached the water's edge, sniffing with canine curiosity, then drinking carefully. The dog had refused lake water, previously instinctively detecting something unnatural in its composition. His willingness to drink now confirmed the transformation had fundamentally altered the water's properties, made it compatible with life rather than hostile to it. As afternoon light slanted across the hollow, Marcus recognized the magnitude of their responsibility. Not just protecting inherited property, but preserving revolutionary healing potential for contaminated lands, for poisoned waters, for damaged ecosystems, and now potentially for injured humans. Veterans exposed to environmental toxins, communities suffering industrial pollution. Children growing up in contaminated environments all might benefit from what Stillwater Hollow contained if properly protected and studied rather than exploited and destroyed. Benjamin had recognized this potential decades earlier, had died defending it against those who would commercialize control and ultimately destroy it through extraction rather than cooperation. Marcus now inherited not just the property, but the mission protecting Stillwater Hollow, until its gifts could be shared under terms that preserved rather than exploited its unique properties. Sophie sensed his resolution, her hand finding his with instinctive understanding. The lake chose us, didn't it? The question contained wisdom beyond her years. Recognition that their arrival wasn't random chance, but convergence of need and purpose. Broken soldier and healing waters finding each other through apparent coincidence that might instead be design. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, noting again the steadiness in his own fingers that had been absent for years. Not scientific certainty, but undeniable experience the lake had reached for them as deliberately as they had reached for it. We chose each other, Sophie, and will protect each other from whatever comes next. The promise encompassed more than father and daughter, extending to the ecosystem awakening, before them to the legacy Benjamin had entrusted to them, to the potential healing their stand might eventually offer others, like themselves, damaged, but resilient, wounded, but not defeated, diminished, but still determined. Shadow barked, once sharp and alerting eyes fixed on the access road where dust clouds signaled approaching vehicles. Not Meridian's black SUVs returning, but different vehicles, a pickup truck Marcus recognized as Rita's, followed by several others of similar vintage. Local supporters arriving with supplies, with information, with reinforcement for the battle that had only just begun. The Hollow would not stand alone against Meridian's next assault, neither would the Wilson family. Whatever came next, they faced it with growing allies, with strengthening position, with the lake itself demonstrating value beyond resource extraction with each passing hour. The days following Meridian's retreat took on the measured cadence of warfare preparation. Not the frantic scramble of crisis response, but the deliberate establishment of defensive perimeters, resource cataloging, and intelligence gathering that marked sustained conflict. Marcus recognized the rhythm from forward operating bases in Afghanistan, the conversion of temporary positions to fortified outposts designed for prolonged engagement. Maya returned to Portland to file emergency protective orders with federal environmental courts, promising to return within 72 hours with legal countermeasures against Meridian's inevitable next offensive. ISA remained at the property, establishing surveillance countermeasures around the perimeter, installing motion sensors at key approach points, and training Marcus on specific security protocols developed during years of corporate resistance activities. Rita Halverson coordinated the local support network, bringing people in carefully staggered shifts to avoid drawing attention through unusual traffic patterns. They arrived in weathered trucks and aging sedans, never more than 3 vehicles at once. Farmers whose water rights had been threatened by previous Meridian operations, former mining employees with documentation of corporate environmental violations, county officials concerned about regulatory capture by outside interests. Each brought specific skills, regional knowledge, and personal motivation to resist corporate appropriation of natural resources. Dr. Eliza Chen, who had initially analyzed Marcus's water samples as a laboratory technician, now arrived daily with increasingly sophisticated equipment. What had begun as professional curiosity had evolved into dedicated scientific investigation, as test results confirmed unprecedented microbial properties. With Marcus's permission, she converted the cabin's small side room into a field research station, monitoring the lake's accelerating transformation with methodical precision. The organisms are consuming heavy metals at rates exponentially beyond theoretical maximums. Dr. Chen adjusted microscope settings, face illuminated by the screen, showing magnified microbes in frantic motion. Their metabolic efficiency defies established biochemical parameters. They're not just neutralizing toxins, they're actively converting them into beneficial compounds: nitrogen fixation, phosphorus, stabilization, oxygen generation. This could revolutionize environmental remediation worldwide. Sophie had taken to following the scientists during sample collection, her sketchbook filling with increasingly detailed drawings of the lake's transformation. The two had developed unexpected rapport, professional scientist and intuitive child observer, complementing each other's documentation methods. Dr. Chan had begun incorporating Sophie's artistic observations into her formal reports, noting correlations between the girl's illustrations and quantifiable changes in the ecosystem. Your drawings capture energy flows between microbial communities that my instruments can't detect, Dr. Chen explained, comparing Sophie's latest sketch with microscope imagery. It's as if you're seeing ecological relationships my scientific equipment can't measure. This perspective is invaluable for understanding the lake as integrated system rather than collection of separate elements. Shadow maintained constant perimeter awareness, conducting regular patrol circuits with military precision. The dog's behavior had fully transitioned to deployment protocols. Sleep cycles reduced to minimum requirement, sensory vigilance maximized protective positioning, automatically adjusted to changing threat assessments. He responded to hand signals and command words with flawless accuracy, combat training, overriding civilian pet behaviors entirely. On the third morning after Meridian's inspection, Marcus stood at the lake edge cataloging visible changes. Water clarity now extended nearly 30 feet down, revealing lakebed features previously hidden beneath metallic opacity. Aquatic plants had established complex colonies, their growth patterns forming concentric circles mirroring the lake's pulsing ripples. Fish population had expanded from initial minnows to include larger species, trout-like creatures with unusual blue-tinted scales, amphibians with translucent skin, revealing bioluminescent organs, invertebrates, unlike any conventional classification. The ecological resurrection continued at impossible speed, defying natural timelines for habitat recovery. Dr. Chen's analysis suggested the microbial communities were actively accelerating normal processes, stimulating dormant seeds, reactivating preserved DNA fragments, essentially reconstructing the ecosystem that had existed before government testing decades earlier. More remarkable still were the documented health effects. Marcus's hand tremors had diminished significantly following direct water contact, neurological symptoms from combat zone metal exposure, showing measurable improvement. Blood tests revealed decreasing heavy metal concentrations in his system, progressive detoxification occurring without conventional medical intervention. Similar effects appeared in Shadow, the dog's previously stiff gait, smoothing into fluid movement, combat injuries, showing unprecedented healing acceleration. Rita reported improved respiratory function after brief exposure to water samples, decades of mining town pollutants apparently being neutralized in her lung tissue. The healing properties extended beyond immediate contact. Soil samples from increasing distances showed microbial migration, contaminated ground becoming progressively cleaner in concentric patterns radiating from the lake. Downstream water testing demonstrated toxin reduction extending miles beyond the property boundaries, suggesting potential watershed-level remediation capabilities. Each documented benefit strengthened their defensive position against Meridian's environmental hazard claims, while simultaneously increasing the lake's value as corporate acquisition target. The transformative capabilities that made the ecosystem worth protecting also made it more desirable for commercial exploitation, paradox that Benjamin had navigated for decades and now passed to Marcus. Maya returned on the fourth morning, accompanied by environmental legal specialists recruited from 3 different conservation organizations. They assembled around the cabin's main table, spreading documents, tablets, and legal reference materials in organized chaos that somehow coalesced into coordinated strategy session. We've secured emergency federal protection orders under 3 separate statutes. Maya organized documentation with practiced efficiency. Environmental Species Recovery Act, based on the salamander reappearance. National watershed protection provisions triggered by documented detoxification of downstream waterways. And most importantly, biomedical research conservation protection under experimental medical applications provisions. The overlapping protections created multi-jurisdictional shielding that would require Meridian to fight simultaneous battles across different federal courts, resource-intensive even for corporate legal departments. Each designation carried specific restrictions on property and access sample collection and development activities. Federal protection isn't permanent, but creates mandatory evaluation period, minimum 9 months before any extraction permits can be considered. During that time, we continued documenting the lake's environmental and medical benefits, building case for permanent conservation status. Marcus absorbed the legal framework with military precision, translating complex statutes into actionable intelligence. The protections established defensive perimeter, but wouldn't prevent determined corporate assault using other vectors. Meridian's resources extended beyond conventional legal channels, political influence, media manipulation, regulatory capture, covert operations. As if reading his tactical assessment, Issa expanded the security briefing. Meridian has already initiated countermeasures. Their public relations department launched a media campaign this morning, press releases claiming environmental concerns about unregulated biological experimentation at the property. They're positioning themselves as responsible corporate citizens, protecting public safety from dangerous amateur science. She displayed tablets showing news coverage already appearing across regional outlets, carefully crafted stories raising questions about mysterious activity at Stillwater Hollow, suggesting potential environmental risks, positioning Meridian as established scientific authority versus reclusive property owners with unknown intentions. Simultaneously, they filed complaints with 7 different regulatory agencies: EPA, Fish and Wildlife State Water Commission, County Health Department, Army Corps of Engineers, Forest Service, and Department of the Interior. Standard saturation tactic overwhelm. Limited bureaucratic resources create impression of legitimate concern through volume alone. The approach matched corporate playbooks Marcus had studied during environmental activism research after discovering Benjamin's journals. Administrative paralysis through procedural flooding. Each complaint requiring formal response documentation, potentially site visits and hearings. Death by bureaucratic attrition rather than direct confrontation. Maya continued the strategic assessment, outlining additional Meridian vectors. Their legal department has also filed challenges to your inheritance validity, claiming Benjamin wasn't competent when executing his will, suggesting documentation irregularities, questioning property boundary surveys. They've petitioned for emergency property receivership during legal determination, which would temporarily transfer control to court-appointed administrator, inevitably someone sympathetic to corporate interests. The methodology reflected military psychological operations, multiple simultaneous pressure points designed to create overwhelming cognitive burden, resource depletion, and decision paralysis. Marcus recognized the approach from counterinsurgency doctrine, isolation of targets, through cumulative stressors rather than direct engagement. But Meridian had miscalculated in one crucial aspect. Marcus had experienced far more extreme pressure environment during multiple combat deployments. The corporate assault registered as manageable tactical challenge rather than overwhelming threat. His military training had prepared him for precisely this type of multi-vector engagement. The strategy session expanded as Rita arrived with additional local supporters, each contributing specific expertise and connections to their growing resistance network. Maya organized their collective intelligence into cohesive counter-strategy, assigning specific responsibilities based on individual capabilities. Legal defense teams would address inheritance challenges and regulatory complaints. Scientific documentation would continue under Dr. Chen's supervision, creating evidence record for federal protection extension. Local political engagement would build community support against outside corporate interests. As darkness fell, the gathering concluded with clear action plans, communication protocols, and emergency response procedures. The atmosphere carried determined optimism, David organizing effectively against corporate Goliath community cooperation, opposing extractive capitalism, scientific truth, challenging profit-motivated distortion. Marcus remained on the porch after others departed, watching moonlight illuminate the lake's transformed surface. The water now reflected sky and stars, mirror property restored after decades of metallic opacity. The ecosystem's recovery symbolized larger potential damaged systems could heal, given proper protection. Natural resilience could overcome artificial disruption, balance could return after prolonged exploitation. Shadow's sudden alertness broke his contemplation, ears forward, body tense, attention focused toward the access road. Not immediate threat posture, but definite awareness of approaching presence. Moments later, headlights appeared between trees, single vehicle moving cautiously without excessive speed. Marcus positioned himself strategically, shotgun within reach, but not in hand. The approaching vehicle was unfamiliar, not Rita's pickup or Maya's sedan, but newer model Jeep with government plates. It stopped well short of the cabin headlights, extinguished driver remaining inside momentarily, before opening door with deliberate slowness. The figure that emerged moved with military precision, economy of motion, environmental awareness, tactical positioning. Male mid-50s bearing that suggested command experience rather than enlisted background. He made no attempt to approach further, instead remaining beside his vehicle with hands clearly visible. Colonel James Harrison, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, retired. The voice carried practiced authority without aggression. I'd like to speak with you regarding Benjamin Wilson's research if you are willing. Marcus maintained tactical advantage position. You'll understand my caution given recent events. Identification, please. Place it on your hood and step back. The man complied with precise movements that confirmed military background. He extracted wallet and credentials, case placing both on the vehicle hood before retreating 3 measured paces. The behavior demonstrated understanding of security protocols, recognition of Marcus's legitimate concerns, deliberate de-escalation signals, professional courtesy between veterans. Marcus approached carefully, maintaining sight lines and defensive positioning. The credentials appeared legitimate: military ID, government retirement documentation, business card, and identifying environmental remediation consultancy. He signaled Shadow to conduct perimeter check while he evaluated the visitor. I knew your uncle for 20 years. The man remained in non-threatening posture, voice calibrated for candor rather than persuasion. We worked together during initial government testing in the 70s before Meridian's involvement. I've been monitoring the situation since his death, waiting to see if anyone would actually claim the property and continue his work. The claim contained verifiable elements, specific historical knowledge timeline, accuracy, contextual details that suggested direct involvement rather than researched approach. Marcus maintained cautious assessment while considering tactical implications of potential new ally with government and military connections. Why appear now? 3 months after I inherited, days after Meridian's inspection and federal protection, filing Harrison's expression reflected professional appreciation for direct questioning. The protective orders you secured through Maya Ramirez triggered notifications in multiple federal systems. I've been waiting for evidence you understood what Benjamin was protecting and had resources to continue his mission. The legal filings demonstrated both conditions had been met. The explanation aligned with procedural realities. Federal protection applications would generate automated alerts to previously involved agencies, potentially notifying former personnel with access privileges. Harrison's appearance represented logical progression rather than suspicious coincidence. Marcus maintained operational security while signaling conditional engagement. We can talk, but not here. Too many electronic surveillance possibilities. There's a clearing quarter-mile east with better sight lines and minimal technical coverage. Harrison acknowledged with slight nod, recognizing both the invitation and operational parameters. They moved in separate vehicles, tactical decision maintaining independent mobility for both parties. The clearing Marcus selected offered natural advantages: elevated position, multiple exit roads, limited approach, vectors easily monitored. As they established position, Harrison initiated with direct operational assessment. Meridian has deployed considerably more resources against you than typical acquisition targets. Corporate headquarters has designated Stillwater Hollow highest priority extraction site nationwide above even their Wyoming uranium claims and Nevada lithium operations. The microbes aren't just scientifically valuable, they represent existential threat to multiple billion-dollar remediation contracts. If natural biological solutions become viable, entire industrial cleanup sector collapses. The insight expanded Marcus's strategic understanding. Benjamin's journals had focused on scientific importance and healing potential rather than commercial threat implications. The microbes represented not just revolutionary advancement, but direct competition against established corporate interests. Environmental remediation industry, potentially rendered obsolete by natural alternatives. Harrison continued with insider perspective gained through decades of government environmental work. The lithium deposits alone would justify acquisition interest estimated $3 billion in extraction value. But the biological properties represent larger threat. Meridian holds exclusive contracts for 27 Superfund site remediations, 15 military base decontaminations, and 43 industrial cleanup operations. Total contract value exceeds $50 billion over 30 years. If naturally occurring microbes can accomplish the same work in fraction of the time at minimal cost, their entire business model implodes. The financial scale explained Meridian's extraordinary resource deployment against single property owner, existential corporate threat rather than simple acquisition opportunity. They weren't just pursuing valuable resource, but actively suppressing competitive technology that threatened market dominance. Harrison shifted to immediate tactical assessment. They've already initiated next phase operations beyond the legal and regulatory challenges. 3 separate surveillance teams have established observation posts around the property perimeter, electronic monitoring communications interception, movement tracking. They've inserted operative into County Environmental Services Office to access official documentation. Their security contractors have conducted detailed terrain mapping for potential extraction operation. Marcus integrated the intelligence into defensive planning, calculating resource allocation against identified threats. Your information matches our assessment, but why provide it? What's your interest in opposing Meridian? Harrison's response carried the weight of decades-long professional regret. I led the original government research team that identified the lake's unique properties. We recognized the environmental potential immediately natural decontamination system, unlike anything previously documented. Our recommendation was conservation and controlled scientific development for public benefit. His expression hardened with remembered frustration. Then Meridian's predecessor corporation acquired mineral rights to adjacent properties. Suddenly, our research became classified, access restricted, findings suppressed. They engineered my reassignment to projects overseas. When I returned years later, the government had abandoned the site, and Benjamin was fighting alone to protect what we discovered. The narrative aligned with Benjamin's journal's government scientists initially pursuing legitimate research. Corporate interests subsequently corrupting process through political influence, profit motivation, overriding environmental and public health considerations. I've spent 30 years watching Meridian and similar corporations systematically extract resources while leaving devastation behind. Harrison's voice carried the controlled intensity of long-sustained moral conviction. I've designed their containment systems, witnessed their failure rates, calculated the generational damage they knowingly cause. This lake represents something different, natural restoration rather than industrial exploitation. I won't watch it disappear into corporate ownership. The declaration established credible motivation, professional redemption, ethical alignment, specific expertise relevant to current conflict. Harrison represented potential high-value ally with insider knowledge, technical capabilities, and personal commitment to the lake's protection. Marcus maintained strategic caution while acknowledging potential alliance. What specifically can you provide beyond intelligence on Meridian's operations? Harrison outlined capabilities with military precision, technical countermeasures against their surveillance systems, documentation of prior environmental violations that didn't reach public record, contact with other former government scientists who worked on the original research. Most importantly, access to classified research. Benjamin never saw complete analysis of the microbe's capabilities conducted before corporate interests shut down public benefit applications. The resources represented significant tactical advantage, technical capabilities beyond current team's expertise, historical documentation, strengthening legal defense, scientific information, expanding understanding of the lake's potential. Harrison's involvement would substantially enhance their defensive position while providing offensive capabilities previously unavailable. They established secure communication protocols, information exchange parameters, and operational security measures. Harrison would maintain separate position rather than joining the cabin defense team, strategic decision, creating independent operational capability, less vulnerable to single-point compromise. His government and military connections would provide early warning of official actions, while his environmental engineering expertise would strengthen technical defenses against Meridian's extraction attempts. As they concluded the operational planning, Harrison provided final assessment that expanded the conflict's significance beyond local property dispute. This isn't just about one lake or one corporation. It's about fundamental approach to environmental recovery. Industrial remediation perpetuates extraction mentality, treating symptoms while maintaining systems that created the damage. These microbes represent entirely different paradigm: natural restoration, self-sustaining recovery, ecological healing rather than technological management. The perspective elevated the strategic importance of their resistance, not merely protecting specific property, but advancing alternative environmental philosophy with global implications. Stillwater Hollow represented not just unique ecosystem, but demonstration site for revolutionary approach to planetary healing, natural systems restoring balance without industrial intervention. Dawn brought renewed activity to the property doctor. Chen collecting expanded sample sets for laboratory analysis. Maya coordinating legal responses to Meridian's administrative filings, Isa implementing Harrison's surveillance countermeasures around the perimeter. The team operated with increasingly coordinated efficiency, specialized capabilities integrating into cohesive defensive operation. Marcus established central coordination from the cabin, maintaining tactical oversight, while delegating specific functions to team members with relevant expertise. The approach reflected military command principles: clear communication channels, defined responsibilities, adaptive response capabilities, contingency planning. What had begun as desperate individual stand against corporate intrusion had evolved into organized resistance movement with growing capabilities. Mid-morning brought first indication of Meridian's next offensive. Rita arrived with intelligence gathered through her local network. County commissioners had scheduled emergency session regarding potential public health concern at Stillwater Hollow. Meridian representatives would present evidence of unusual biological activity, potentially threatening regional water supplies. Maya immediately recognized the tactical approach. Classic misdirection, weaponizing the lake's healing properties as public threat. They'll present the accelerated microbial activity as unpredictable biological process requiring immediate containment. Once they establish public safety rationale, they can bypass normal environmental restrictions under emergency response provisions. The strategy demonstrated Meridian's adaptive capabilities using the lake's transformation against its defenders by reframing healing properties as potential contamination risk. The approach exploited bureaucratic risk aversion and public fear of unfamiliar biological processes to overcome scientific evidence and legal protections. Maya organized immediate counter-response. Dr. Chen would prepare presentation demonstrating the microbes' beneficial effects on water quality. Sophie's drawings would document ecosystem recovery. Visually water testing results would establish concrete evidence of contamination reduction rather than introduction. Harrison would activate contacts within state environmental agencies to challenge Meridian's scientific claims with government counter-evidence. As response team mobilized, Shadow's alert posture indicated approaching vehicles, 3 unmarked SUVs, moving with coordinated precision along the access road. Not Meridian's corporate fleet, but different tactical presence, government, rather than private official, rather than commercial. The vehicles established perimeter formation around the clearing personnel, emerging with the disciplined movement of law enforcement rather than corporate security. An older man in formal attire approached the cabin, credentials case extended. Federal Environmental Protection Agency, Special Containment Division. We have authorization to inspect the property under national biological security protocols based on reported unusual microbial activity potentially affecting interstate waterways. Maya intercepted immediately legal documentation ready. Our federal protection orders specifically exempt the property from standard inspection protocols during conservation assessment period. Any evaluation must be conducted under supervised scientific protocols with property owner representatives present throughout. The official maintained professional demeanor while signaling subordinates to maintain position rather than advance. We acknowledge your protection filings. This inspection operates under separate national security provisions related to novel biological agents. The authorization supersedes standard environmental protocols when potential watershed impacts cross state boundaries. The approach represented sophisticated escalation using national security frameworks to override environmental protections, reclassifying natural microbial activity as potential security concern, establishing federal jurisdiction beyond standard regulatory boundaries. Meridian had clearly activated high-level government connections to bypass the legal protections Maya had secured. Maya countered with equal procedural expertise. Then you'll need to present specific judicial authorization identifying the national security provision being invoked, evidence of interstate impact, and confirmation of biological classification warranting containment response. Without complete documentation, this remains unauthorized entry attempt against federally protected research site. The exchange reflected bureaucratic warfare at highest levels, procedural requirements deployed as tactical weapons, jurisdiction, boundaries contested through documentation, demands, authorization hierarchies, challenged through regulatory classification disputes. The official hesitated, clearly unprepared for knowledgeable resistance to authority invocation that typically secured immediate compliance. Marcus maintained strategic oversight while allowing Maya to lead legal confrontation. The approach balanced their respective capabilities, her expertise in environmental law, complemented by his tactical positioning of Shadow and Isa at key defensive points around the property. If legal barriers failed, physical security remained secondary option. The federal official reassessed, recognizing prepared resistance rather than intimidated compliance. His next approach revealed coordination with Meridian's strategy. We've received concerning reports about unusual water properties potentially affecting human health. There are claims of psychoactive effects, cognitive alterations following exposure, potential contamination with unknown biological agents. These reports require immediate investigation under public health emergency provisions. The pivot demonstrated tactical flexibility, shifting from national security to public health justification, adapting approach when initial authority claim proved ineffective. The reference to psychoactive effects revealed strategic integration with Meridian's County Commission presentation, coordinated multi-level pressure from federal and local authorities simultaneously. Dr. Chen joined the Confrontation Scientific Authority, complementing Maya's legal expertise. I've conducted comprehensive analysis of the water composition under certified laboratory protocols. She presented documentation on professional letterhead. All substances present are naturally occurring, non-toxic, and demonstrably beneficial to biological systems. The microbial communities are classified under standard environmental categories with no psychoactive properties or cognitive alteration capabilities. The scientific counter-evidence created procedural complication. Official inspection, justification, contradicted by certified professional analysis. Emergency provisions undermined by documented safety evidence. Containment rationale challenged by established biological classification. The federal team leaders signaled colleagues for consultation, tactical retreat to reassess approach rather than forced confrontation. We'll return with complete authorization documentation addressing these specific concerns. His tone conveyed professional recognition of prepared opposition rather than abandoned objective. Expect formal proceedings within 24 hours. The vehicles departed with coordinated precision that confirmed government rather than corporate operation. Maya translated the interaction into strategic assessment. They're establishing escalation pattern: first county-level health concerns, then federal biological security, next likely presidential emergency declaration if those fail. Each level expands authority scope while reducing procedural requirements. They're building justification framework for mandatory evacuation and government seizure. The approach matched Benjamin's journals describing earlier attempts to gain control of the property, progressive authority escalation, coordinated multi-agency pressure, emergency provision, invocation to bypass normal property rights protections. The playbook remained consistent despite decades passing, suggesting institutional methodology rather than individual tactical choice. ESA expanded the assessment with security implications. This confirms Harrison's intelligence. Meridian has activated high-level government connections beyond standard corporate influence channels. The coordinated timing between county commission meeting and federal inspection team indicates centralized strategic direction rather than parallel operations. The realization shifted their defensive requirements, no longer just resisting corporate acquisition, but opposing government seizure under emergency powers. The escalation fundamentally altered the conflict parameters, introducing capabilities beyond conventional legal challenges or public opinion campaigns. Marcus integrated the tactical development into revised defense planning. If they've activated federal emergency provisions, we have limited time before more aggressive enforcement appears. We need immediate documentation distribution, beyond government reach, public visibility, that prevents covert action and contingency plans for worst-case scenarios. The team mobilized with renewed urgency, Dr. Chen preparing comprehensive water analysis for international scientific publication, Maya establishing legal dead man switches that would release all evidence to multiple media outlets if communication ceased, ISA implementing surveillance countermeasures against potential electronic warfare designed to isolate the property from outside contact. Sophie continued her documentation through increasingly detailed drawings, capturing the lake's transformation with artistic precision that scientific instruments couldn't fully record. Her latest illustrations showed not just physical changes, but energy patterns connecting various ecosystem elements, intuitive perception of relationships between water plants, animals, and microbial communities that conventional analysis missed entirely. As preparation intensified, Harrison's secure communication channel activated with urgent intelligence. Satellite monitoring shows unusual activity at Fort Carson Military Base, hazardous materials, response team, mobilization biological containment vehicles preparation. Appears they're assembling specialized unit with capabilities far beyond standard EPA inspection teams. Estimated deployment within 12 hours if following normal protocols. The development confirmed worst-case escalation, military deployment, rather than civilian regulatory response, biological warfare containment protocols rather than environmental inspection procedures, overwhelming force capabilities instead of bureaucratic pressure tactics. The approach represented government resources far beyond their defensive capacity if conventional confrontation occurred. Maya processed the intelligence through legal framework. They're establishing classification under Biological Weapons Convention exception, claiming unknown microbial properties represent potential security threat requiring military containment. Once that classification exists, normal constitutional protections regarding property rights and due process become essentially suspended. The assessment matched historical patterns from Benjamin's documentation, government agencies progressively elevating classification levels until normal legal protections no longer applied. Security provisions overriding environmental considerations, military authority, supplanting civilian regulatory jurisdiction. Marcus recognized the approaching culmination point moment when asymmetric response became necessary, when conventional resistance became counterproductive, when strategic rather than tactical thinking determined outcome. His military experience provided framework for what conventional environmental activism couldn't address: fundamental power imbalance between government capabilities and citizen rights when national security provisions were invoked. We need to release everything immediately, all research, all documentation, all evidence, not just to media, but to international scientific community, environmental organizations worldwide, medical research institutions globally. Harrison's military background aligned with Marcus's assessment. Once they establish biological security containment, information becomes classified. Our only protection is making everything public before they can suppress it. The approach represented strategic rather than tactical thinking, acknowledging inability to physically resist military deployment while establishing information distribution that would prevent complete suppression. Public awareness wouldn't stop immediate government action, but would ensure long-term accountability and prevent permanent burial of the lake's healing potential. Maya coordinated immediate implementation, activating pre-established distribution channels to environmental organizations, scientific journals, international media outlets, medical research institutions. Dr. Chen finalized comprehensive documentation of the lake's properties, transformation, progression, and healing capabilities. Sophie's drawings were digitized and included as alternative documentation method, capturing qualitative changes conventional science missed. As digital distribution commenced, Marcus recognized additional necessary component physical evidence beyond government containment capabilities. The microbial communities themselves needed protection beyond the property that would inevitably be seized under emergency provisions. He retrieved Benjamin's journals containing detailed propagation methods, procedures for maintaining viable microbe colonies in various environments, techniques for establishing new communities in compatible water systems, approaches for preserving genetic material during adverse conditions. His uncle had prepared for exactly this scenario government seizure of the primary lake, requiring biological lifeboat strategy to preserve the microbial communities elsewhere. Read a coordinated implementation through local supporter network distributing sealed water samples containing viable microbe colonies to trusted individuals with appropriate environment maintenance capabilities. Dr. Chen prepared specialized containers designed for maximum longevity with detailed maintenance instructions, ensuring microbial survival beyond immediate crisis. Each recipient understood their role as biological trustees, preserving living samples until scientific and legal protection could be reestablished. As his distribution networks activated, Harrison provided updated intelligence with increasing urgency. Military containment team deployment accelerated departure within 4 hours rather than 12. Hazardous materials protocols established for 50-mile radius around property. Flight restrictions implemented under national security provisions. Communications suppression package activated for regional coverage. The accelerated timeline confirmed their assessment, coordinated government corporate operation designed for overwhelming response with minimal public awareness. The approach combined military capabilities with corporate strategic objectives utilizing national security frameworks to accomplish private acquisition goals while preventing effective resistance through information control. Marcus assembled core team for final strategic assessment. Maya Issa, Dr. Chen Harrison coordinating remotely. Sophie included as essential perspective rather than protected child. The situation required complete shared understanding and coordinated decision-making based on realistic capability assessment rather than hopeful delusion. We can't physically resist military deployment. Marcus established fundamental parameters with professional clarity. That's not victory condition. Our objective is preservation of the microbe's healing potential beyond this location, documentation, distribution, preventing permanent suppression, and establishing public accountability that prevents quiet disappearance of everything Benjamin protected. The framework shifted focus from property defense to mission continuity, acknowledging tactical defeat while ensuring strategic success, accepting temporary setback while preserving long-term objective. Benjamin had maintained this perspective through decades of isolation, protecting the lake's potential rather than claiming personal victory, preserving critical knowledge rather than winning public recognition. Maya outlined legal continuity strategy. I've filed emergency injunctions in 7 separate jurisdictions, challenging classification authority, demanding judicial review of emergency provisions, and requiring scientific evaluation before containment procedures. None will prevent immediate military action, but each creates procedural requirement for subsequent accountability. They can seize the property today, but they'll face continuing legal challenges for years. Dr. Chen detailed scientific preservation approach. Beyond the physical samples we've distributed, I've established complete genetic sequencing documentation with international research institutions. Even if they destroy every microbe here, the biological information exists independently. Comparable communities could potentially be cultivated from the genetic blueprint, especially with Sophie's documentation of energy patterns, conventional analysis missed. ISA confirmed distribution security status. Information packages have been received by 117 separate organizations across 32 countries. Dead man switch protocols will release additional documentation if our communications cease. Surveillance countermeasures will maintain operational awareness during property seizure, providing evidence of actual government actions versus official claims. The comprehensive continuity strategy established resilience beyond the immediate location, distributed information, biological preservation, legal challenges, public accountability, mechanisms, and operational monitoring capabilities. The approach transformed apparent defeat into strategic repositioning, acknowledging loss of physical territory while maintaining mission integrity through dispersed continuation. Sophie's contribution represented unexpected perspective that expanded their thinking beyond conventional resistance frameworks. The lake isn't just here. Her small hands trace patterns on the map extending far beyond the property boundaries. It's connected to everything around it: underground water streams, soil, microbes, plants, animals. They can take this place, but they can't capture all the connections. The healing has already started spreading. The observation contained profound strategic insight: ecosystems existed beyond arbitrary property boundaries. Natural processes continued, regardless of human jurisdiction. Claims healing capabilities expanded through inherent biological distribution mechanisms. The lake was an isolated entity, but connected system already extending beyond containment possibilities. Dr. Chen confirmed the assessment with scientific validation. She's right. Our samples show microbial communities already established in soil systems up to 12 miles downstream. They're adapting to different environmental conditions, establishing viable colonies in various ecosystems. The process has biological momentum beyond our property boundaries. The realization transformed their strategic understanding from protecting isolated phenomenon to supporting expansion already in progress, from defending fixed position to facilitating natural distribution process, from resisting overwhelming force to channeling it toward futile objective. The microbe's inherent propagation capabilities represented resilience mechanism beyond human control systems. As final preparations concluded, distant helicopter sounds confirmed imminent military arrival. Marcus made critical decision reflecting deeper understanding of their actual objective. We don't resist, we document, we witness, we preserve evidence of what happens here, but we don't create justification for maximum force deployment. The approach acknowledged tactical reality while maintaining strategic integrity. Physical resistance would provide containment rationale, justify extreme measures, potentially endanger team members, while accomplishing nothing meaningful toward their actual goal of preserving the microbe's healing potential beyond immediate location. Shadow's alert posture indicated vehicles approaching from the access road, military transport rather than civilian SUVs, hazardous materials, containment equipment rather than standard inspection vehicles, armed personnel rather than regulatory officials. The deployment scale confirmed Harrison's intelligence: full biological containment operation under national security protocols rather than environmental inspection under regulatory provisions. Marcus positioned team members for maximum documentation capability while minimizing personal risk. Maya recording legal violations for subsequent court challenges. Chen documenting scientific protocols being implemented. Issa maintaining surveillance countermeasures to prevent electronic evidence manipulation. Sophie remained inside with Shadow, both the child and dog, understanding the protection assignment without verbal instruction. The military containment team established perimeter control with practiced efficiency, concentric security zones, decontamination stations, command posts separate from operational areas. Their methodology reflected specialized training in biological threat response rather than standard property seizure, treating the lake as potential weapons-grade contaminant rather than valuable natural resource. The operation commander approached with formal notification. Federal seizure order under biological security provisions, mandatory evacuation requirement, classified operation status, preventing detailed explanation. His demeanor conveyed professional execution of assigned mission rather than personal investment in the operation's underlying purpose. Maya accepted documentation while clearly establishing legal position. We acknowledge receipt of these orders while reserving all rights to challenge their constitutional validity, scientific justification, and procedural implementation. She activated recording device openly. We will comply with evacuation requirements under explicit protest, maintaining continuous documentation of all activities for subsequent legal proceedings. The formal response established critical legal foundation compliance under protest rather than voluntary cooperation, explicit documentation of constitutional challenges, clear evidence preservation for subsequent proceedings. The approach prevented resistance justification while maintaining legal standing for future challenges. As evacuation proceeded, Marcus ensured comprehensive documentation transfer all physical evidence, not already distributed all local electronic storage devices, all remaining sample containers. The property would be lost temporarily, but the information evidence and biological materials were already distributed beyond government containment capabilities. The containment team's operational procedures revealed their actual objective despite security classification. Instead of standard hazardous material containment approaching the lake with maximum caution, technical specialists moved with focused purpose towards specific sampling locations marked on detailed maps. Their equipment included extraction technology rather than just containment systems, collection protocols rather than neutralization procedures. The operational reality confirmed Meridian's influence behind government action: commercial resource extraction, disguised as security containment, corporate acquisition, implementing through military deployment, private profit motivation, operating through public safety justification. The approach represented sophisticated corruption of government function for corporate benefit using national security provisions to accomplish commercial objectives beyond public accountability. Marcus documented the procedural discrepancies with military precision, noting extraction activities inconsistent with containment protocols, sampling procedures designed for resource assessment rather than threat neutralization, selective focus on commercially valuable lake sections rather than comprehensive security approach. Each observation strengthened subsequent legal challenges while establishing clear evidence of the operation's actual purpose. As final evacuation preparations concluded, Sophie approached the lake edge one last time, Shadow maintaining protective position beside her. She knelt at the water's edge, small hands extended above the surface that now rippled with deliberate patterns, responding to her presence. The connection lasted momentary seconds before military personnel intervened with unnecessary urgency, separation revealing their ignorance regarding the water's actual properties. In the transport vehicle removing them from the property, Sophie whispered observation that transformed apparent defeat into profound strategic insight. They can take the place, but the lake already knows what to do. It's been waiting for this moment since before Uncle Benjamin found it. The healing doesn't stop just because they try to control it. The perspective contained wisdom beyond conventional resistance, thinking natural systems operated according to evolutionary imperatives beyond human manipulation. Biological intelligence responded to threats through adaptation rather than confrontation. Healing processes continued through distribution mechanisms beyond containment capabilities. The military operation targeting fixed location, while the actual phenomenon had already expanded beyond their jurisdictional boundaries. As they departed property boundaries, Harrison's secure communication delivered final strategic assessment based on classified information access. They're implementing extraction protocols developed for Meridian's corporate headquarters, not standard containment procedures. Technical specialists are Meridian contractors operating under military authority. The containment justification is completely fabricated, corporate resource acquisition operating through national security theater. The confirmation strengthened their legal position, while validating strategic approach government resources being misappropriated for corporate benefit, national security provisions, weaponized for private profit, military capabilities deployed against citizens to secure commercial advantage. Each element represented constitutional violation, procedural abuse, and corruption of government function that subsequent accountability mechanisms could address. 1 week later, Marcus stood with Sophie on Rita's property, overlooking the valley containing Stillwater Hollow. Military vehicles remained visible around the lake perimeter, hazardous materials tents established near the cabin, technical equipment positioned for what appeared to be comprehensive extraction operation. The government containment theater continued, despite growing media attention questioning its legitimacy. But the actual strategic situation had evolved beyond apparent visual evidence. International scientific journals had published Dr. Chen's comprehensive analysis of the lake's unique properties. Environmental organizations had distributed documentation of the microbes' remediation capabilities. Medical research institutions had initiated studies based on the healing properties Sophie had experienced. The information existed beyond government classification capabilities, establishing global awareness that prevented complete suppression. More importantly, the microbial communities themselves had already expanded beyond the property boundaries, established in downstream watersheds, soil systems throughout the valley, even groundwater aquifers extending beneath adjacent properties. The natural distribution mechanisms had proceeded for months before government intervention, biological propagation following ecological pathways, rather than respecting arbitrary property designations. Harrison's secure communication confirmed the government operation's fundamental failure. Their containment procedures are proving completely ineffective. The microbial communities adapt faster than their suppression chemicals work. They're extracting samples from Meridian's research division, but the organisms expire within hours outside the hollow's specific conditions. They can't transport viable cultures to corporate laboratories despite multiple preservation protocols. The natural intelligence Benjamin had documented decades earlier was demonstrating sophisticated defense mechanisms, adapting to containment chemicals through accelerated evolution, requiring specific environmental conditions for viability that prevented laboratory cultivation, essentially resisting human control through biological resilience beyond technological countermeasures. Maya's legal challenges had gained significant traction. Three separate federal judges had issued orders requiring scientific justification for continued emergency provisions. Congressional Oversight Committee had initiated investigation into potential misuse of military resources for corporate benefit. International environmental organizations had filed human rights complaints regarding suppression of potential healing technology. The accountability mechanisms were functioning despite initial overwhelming force deployment. Most significantly, distributed microbe samples had established viable colonies in 17 separate locations across 9 states, carefully selected watersheds with comparable conditions to Stillwater Hollow, maintained by Benjamin's network of environmental allies activated through Rita's connections. The biological preservation strategy had succeeded beyond their initial projections, with multiple independent communities demonstrating the same healing properties observed in the original lake. Dr. Chen monitored these distributed communities with growing excitement. The microbes are demonstrating extraordinary adaptive capabilities, establishing symbiotic relationships with local organisms, accelerating detoxification processes in new watersheds, essentially transforming entire ecosystems toward healthier balance. It's not just preservation, but expansion, the healing capabilities multiplying through natural distribution channels. The strategic reality contradicted the apparent visual evidence: government containment operation, controlling specific property, while actual phenomenon expanded beyond their jurisdiction. Military resources focused on fixed location, while biological process distributed through natural systems. Corporate acquisition, targeting isolated resource that had already propagated beyond their control capabilities. Sophie expressed this fundamental understanding with characteristic clarity. They're trying to own something that was never meant to be owned. The lake is teaching us how healing actually works. It spreads naturally when you stop trying to control it. Uncle Benjamin knew that's why they could never really capture it, even if they took his land. The perspective contained profound philosophical insight beyond tactical assessment. Natural systems operated through cooperative relationship rather than extractive ownership. Healing processes expanded through open distribution rather than controlled monopolization. Biological intelligence expressed through adaptation and resilience rather than centralized control. The conflict represented fundamental worldview collision: extractive capitalism versus regenerative ecology, ownership versus relationship control versus cooperation. Marcus recognized the deeper strategic victory emerging beneath apparent tactical defeat. The property remained under government control, the cabin stood empty, the lake surrounded by military containment protocols. But the actual objective, preserving and expanding the healing capabilities Benjamin had protected for decades, continued through distributed, natural processes beyond human control systems. The microbes themselves had initiated appropriate response to attempted capture, accelerated propagation beyond property boundaries, establishment of viable communities in multiple watersheds, adaptive evolution, developing resistance against containment. Chemicals. The natural intelligence Benjamin had documented had essentially implemented biological continuity strategy without human direction, ensuring survival beyond localized suppression attempt. From Rita's hillside perspective, Marcus could see beyond the military perimeter to the lake's surface, still demonstrating the rhythmic pulsing patterns that had first appeared after Meridian's initial sampling attempt. The water continued its transformation. Despite containment efforts, clarity extending deeper, plant communities expanding faster, fish populations increasing exponentially. The healing process accelerated. Rather than diminished under pressure, natural resilience, strengthening through adaptive response to artificial intervention. Sophie pointed toward downstream watershed extending beyond military control boundaries. Look there, the blue patterns are spreading. The same healing that started in our lake is moving through everything connected to it. Her drawings captured energy flows invisible to conventional observation, microbial communities establishing through groundwater systems, soil fungi, transporting beneficial organisms beyond containment, perimeters, natural distribution mechanisms operating despite human restriction attempts. The government operation had inadvertently accelerated the very process they attempted to control, increased microbial activity, responding to containment chemicals, strengthened resilience, developing through evolutionary pressure, expanded distribution, triggered by extraction attempts. Their intervention had essentially stimulated the lake's defensive capabilities, producing exactly the outcome they sought to prevent. As scientific documentation spread globally, medical researchers initiated preliminary studies based on the healing properties Marcus and Sophie had experienced. Veterans with similar neurological damage from combat zone metal exposure reported symptom improvement following exposure to water from colonies established beyond government containment. Communities near industrial contamination sites documented health benefits from watersheds where microbial samples had established viable populations. The distributed healing that Benjamin had envisioned decades earlier emerged despite government suppression and corporate acquisition attempts. Natural processes continuing beyond human control. Systems. Biological intelligence, establishing resilience through adaptation rather than confrontation. Healing capabilities, expanding through ecological pathways rather than commercial distribution channels. Marcus stood straighter than he had in years, hands steady enough to hold binoculars without visible tremor, neurological function showing continued improvement despite separation from the original lake. Whatever the microbes had initiated through brief contact, continued progressive healing beyond their presence, biological communication established between human systems and natural intelligence that persisted independently. The property battle would continue through legal challenges, public accountability mechanisms, and scientific validation processes. The government operation would eventually face congressional investigation, constitutional scrutiny, and international attention. Meridian's corporate influence would encounter unprecedented resistance from distributed opposition networks rather than isolated individuals. But the fundamental victory already existed beyond these procedural conflicts. The healing capabilities preserved in expanding the natural intelligence documented and distributed, the regenerative potential established beyond suppression possibilities. Benjamin's decades of isolation protecting the lake's potential had culminated in distributed continuation rather than centralized preservation, adaptive resilience rather than fixed defense. As afternoon light illuminated the valley, Marcus recognized the profound strategic lesson emerging from apparent tactical defeat. The most effective resistance against overwhelming force wasn't direct confrontation, but distributed resilience, not defending fixed position, but establishing continuous presence beyond jurisdiction, boundaries, not fighting power directly, but rendering it irrelevant through adaptation and evolution. Sophie leaned against him, small hand finding his with instinctive connection transcending their immediate circumstances. The lake chose correctly. It found exactly the people who would help it spread instead of trying to own it. Uncle Benjamin protected it until the right moment, and we helped it reach everywhere it needed to go. Marcus embraced this deeper understanding while maintaining practical vigilance. The legal challenges would continue, the scientific documentation would expand, the public accountability would increase. But the fundamental victory already existed beyond these procedural conflicts. The healing preserved and distributed, the natural intelligence documented, in propagating the regenerative potential established beyond suppression capabilities. Still, Water Hollow remained under government containment, surrounded by military personnel, subject to extraction operations disguised as security protocols. But the actual phenomenon they sought to control had already expanded beyond their jurisdiction, establishing presence that no institutional authority could fully suppress, initiating transformation that would continue regardless of who claimed ownership over specific territory. As sunset approached, vehicles arrived carrying their expanding support network, Maya returning from court proceedings with encouraging legal developments. Chen bringing latest scientific documentation from distributed colonies, Harrison providing intelligence on the government operations' growing internal conflicts, Rita coordinating local supporters, maintaining watershed protection beyond military jurisdiction. The resistance had transformed from desperate property defense to distributed healing movement, scientific documentation, legal challenges, political accountability, public awareness, and most importantly, biological propagation beyond containment capabilities. What had begun as inheritance protection had evolved into continuation of Benjamin's larger mission, preserving and expanding natural healing potential against extractive exploitation. Shadow maintained alert vigilance beside them, military training integrated with natural instinct, watching the valley with protective awareness that encompassed not just immediate family, but expanding healing process they had helped initiate. The dog embodied the same resilience they had discovered: combat wounds healing through natural processes, adaptive capabilities, strengthening through challenge, protective function, extending beyond physical presence. Marcus surveyed the valley with tactical assessment that transcended military training to encompass ecological understanding. The visual evidence suggested government victory, armed personnel, technical equipment, physical control of specific territory. But the actual strategic reality revealed complete operational failure: natural processes continuing beyond jurisdiction, healing capabilities expanding through ecological pathways, biological intelligence adapting and evolving beyond human control systems. The fundamental paradigm shift Benjamin had protected for decades continued its expansion, from industrial remediation to natural restoration, from technological management to biological healing, from human control to cooperative relationship with natural intelligence. The shift represented not just environmental approach, but philosophical transformation, with implications extending far beyond one property dispute or a corporate acquisition attempt. As darkness settled across the valley, the lake's surface became visible through night vision equipment. Harrison had provided bioluminescent patterns indicating microbial activity levels beyond anything previously documented. The containment operation had inadvertently stimulated exponential growth, evolutionary acceleration, and distribution mechanisms that spread healing capabilities far beyond the original boundaries. Marcus stood with Sophie, watching the glowing patterns extend through connected waterways beyond military perimeter, visible evidence of unstoppable natural process that human institutions could temporarily restrict but never truly contain. The healing continued its expansion through ecological pathways beyond jurisdictional boundaries, natural intelligence adapting and evolving beyond corporate acquisition capabilities. The lake had chosen its defenders perfectly isolated, scientists maintaining crucial knowledge through decades of pressure, combat veteran recognizing strategic rather than tactical priorities, intuitive child perceiving connections beyond conventional observation. Each had contributed essential element to distributed continuation that no single approach could have accomplished alone. Sophie captured this fundamental understanding in her final drawing that evening. The lake depicted not as isolated body, but central node and expanding network, healing energy flowing outward through connected systems, transformation continuing beyond arbitrary boundaries. Her artistic perception documented what conventional science missed: the fundamental interconnection, transcending apparent separation, the healing process continuing through relationship rather than isolation. The lake isn't gone just because they took the property. Her small fingers traced expanding pathways extending beyond the military perimeter. It's becoming part of everything around it: the streams, the groundwater, the plants, the animals. They can't really capture it because it was never just one place. It was always a beginning that needed to spread. The wisdom transcended tactical assessment to reveal strategic truth beyond immediate circumstance. Healing operated through connection rather than isolation. Natural intelligence expanded through relationship rather than control. Biological resilience established through distributed presence rather than centralized defense. The apparent defeat concealed profound transformation continuing beyond human jurisdiction boundaries. Benjamin's isolation protecting Single Lake had culminated in distributed healing beyond any containment possibility. The microbes established viable communities across multiple watersheds. The documentation circulated globally through scientific networks. The healing capabilities demonstrated through increasing medical evidence. The mission continued beyond individual defenders, expanding through natural processes that transcended human control systems. As Marcus watched the bioluminescent patterns spreading outward from Stillwater Hollow, he recognized the full significance of their victory. They hadn't just protected a place or defended a resource. They had facilitated a transformation, ecological, medical, philosophical, that would continue expanding through natural processes beyond any institutional ability to contain or control. The lake had taught them the true nature of resilience, not resistance against overwhelming force, but adaptation that renders such force irrelevant, not defending fixed position, but establishing presence beyond boundaries, not fighting power directly, but transforming the fundamental parameters that give it meaning. The healing would continue its natural expansion, regardless of who claimed ownership over the land where it began.